Under a clear sky above the stone streets of the medieval city, multicolored confetti swirled in the air. Joyful cries were heard everywhere as residents greeted their heroes. They responded with waves of their hands, and the streets echoed with the words, "Glory to the heroes, and eternal glory to the Empire of Isgard." A girl ran along the pavement, trying to catch up with her brother. The children hurried to the parade. Suddenly, the boys stopped, noticing something unusual. A man in dark clothes was walking down the street. The sister ran up and asked her brother why he stopped. The girl looked at the stranger with interest, not understanding who he was and why he was heading in that direction. The brother asked her not to pay attention to him. "This is a dark magician. His face is hidden and his clothes are black." The girl doesn't know who dark magicians are, but she feels that he is dangerous. The children follow him with their eyes. The dark mage is an outcast marked by a curse. A majestic castle rises on the rocks. A girl watches what is happening from the window. She was brought out of her thoughts by approaching footsteps. She was waiting for this man. A man in black clothes entered the hall. Here he was known by the name Minold. He threw the monster's head at the priestess's feet, announcing that the last threat to Isgard had been eliminated. The girl, with a reverent expression on her face, thanked him on behalf of the Empire, bowing her head in a sign of deep respect for the courage and dedication he had shown. He said he didn't need gratitude. All that was important was that she kept her promise. She was genuinely upset by his words. She remembered well that she had made him a promise. His real name is John Kim. The girl claimed that she made him a dark magician not out of hostility, but because she trusted him. She is sincerely grateful for everything he did for the prosperity of the Empire. John asked if he could finally go home. The priestess wanted the boy to stay in case of a new threat. She promised to reward him for this. John refused. He doesn't need rewards. He wants to return to his world as soon as possible. The priestess is honest with him, and she is offended that he does not believe her words. The dark mage reminds that he was brought into this world by force, forced to fight. He asks what she can offer him in return. The girl promises to fulfill his every wish. Without him, the Empire is in danger of collapsing. But all he asks for is grilled chicken. She doesn't understand what he's talking about. He adds braised pork and hot sauce, Wi-Fi, a computer, a large monitor, and the ability to return to your favorite game. She begs him to ask for something from this world, but there is nothing keeping him here anymore. Forced to agree, the priestess begins the ritual of transference. He takes one last look around the room filled with memories, but knows he won't want to come back. She gently but firmly asks him to stand in the center of the seal, pointing to the glowing circle on the floor. He steps forward and stands in the center of the circle, feeling a strange energy begin to pulse beneath his feet. The first step she takes is to remove the protection of holiness from him. He takes off his glove, looking at his hand. The protection only restrained him, but did not protect him. The girl must remove the seal. He holds out his hand. She doesn't understand. After all, he received power, wealth, glory. How can he refuse it? But he doesn't need all that. He asks if she's afraid he'll kill her once the seal disappears. She is ready for this. After all, it all began by her will. The priestess carefully touches his hand, and with a last flash of light, the mark disappears. The skin on his palm becomes clear again. He looks at his hand in surprise, not believing that the seal that bound him has actually disappeared. Next, she plans to perform a ritual and deprive him of the power he received in Isgard. In one movement, he grabs her by the throat. He makes it clear that he's not going to give up his power. Not now. Not after everything he's been through. She says it's dangerous for him to go into the portal with that power. He doesn't care. He spent too much time learning to control her. He throws the girl with all his might onto the stone floor of the hall, and the resounding impact echoes through the walls. Her eyes widen in surprise and fear. He is about to open a portal, although as a dark mage he should not have such an ability. But contrary to the laws of magic, a stream of energy swirls in the air, and a magical portal appears. Sparks fly from his palms, the air thickens, and space trembles, as if time itself is distorted. The priestess, in a panic, tries to stop him, but he is firm and unshakable. His voice sounds calm and confident. For him, there are no boundaries between light and dark magic. He prepared for this day, for this second, rehearsed everything down to the smallest detail thousands of times. He has one last word for her, a menacing fist and the hope that they will never meet again. She tries to hold him back, but all he sees is a flash of light. A stream of power breaks through the roof and goes into the sky. She is left alone, not understanding why he did not see her true motives. Residential apartment building. The flow of magical power is concentrated on one of the apartments. A guy appears inside. He managed to move. He sighs heavily, not believing that the transition was successful. He rises from his knees with relief and looks around. A familiar object attracts attention, a mobile phone. He picks it up, feeling the joy of touching a familiar reality. It's his phone. The thought that he has finally returned home fills him with happiness. But joy gives way to bewilderment. The game won't start. There's no internet connection. Meanwhile, there are armed soldiers in the area where he moved. They have been ordered to patrol the area, but even the corporals do not understand the reason for their presence. One of them notices movement. John, having changed his clothes, goes outside. He is still upset about the lack of internet, but is glad that his phone works at all. While searching for Wi-Fi, he does not notice the soldiers watching him. They see that he is a civilian, although civilians are not allowed to enter here. One of the soldiers suddenly calls out to him, and the guy, turning around in confusion, does not understand why they addressed him in particular, feeling a slight tension in the air. Looking around and not seeing anything threatening, he assumes that everything that is happening is just military exercises, and tries to remain calm despite his inner turmoil. But then he hears a cry, "Run!" The guy doesn't have time to react. A huge shadow hangs over him. John hears someone else yelling at him to duck. A monster quickly jumps on him, but the guy isn't scared. He has power, or did he? Suddenly he realizes his magical energy is gone. It's gone completely. Despite this, he raises his hand, stops the monster, and throws it hard onto the asphalt. The creature's face was smashed beyond recognition, blood gushing from its numerous wounds, drenching its sharp fangs and dripping onto the ground in a heavy, ominous silence. The soldiers watch what is happening in shock. The guy is sure, even without his previous strength, such a creature cannot be his rival. This fight reminds him of his training in Isgard, but one question still haunts him. What is this monster doing in his world? The boy's hands were covered in blood. The soldiers who surrounded him watched him with obvious horror. They looked tense and asked not to come closer. Nearby, a sign said, 1 kilometer to the evacuation point. An army vehicle was moving along the road. John Kim was inside. One of the soldiers said that he could have been sent to prison for such behavior. The driver glanced at the passenger and asked doubtfully if he really didn't know what was going on. The guy replied that he had been abroad for a long time. He understood that the country had changed, that something significant had happened during his absence. When he was 7, dungeons began opening up all over the world and monsters followed suit. At the same time, awakened ones began to appear, people with supernatural powers. They formed squads of hunters whose task was to destroy the creatures that had escaped from the depths of the earth. Before the priestess summoned him to another world, the threat had still been contained in his home country. Now he couldn't understand what had happened. He looked at his phone. The server was still unavailable. He desperately wanted to log into the game, but there was no network connection. The soldier watched him with suspicion. The whole world was on edge, and this guy was acting like he'd just woken up. And yet, remembering how he dealt with the monster, the soldier decided not to ask questions. John called out to the guy and asked if he could get a job at a gaming company now. He really wanted to understand what had happened. The soldier promised to explain. He said that he had studied at the university and had received the highest grade in dungeon theory and monstrology. The situation has worsened, he said, due to a phenomenon discovered about 2 years ago. Dungeons began to appear much more frequently, and with them, giant monsters. It became more difficult for them to hold back the onslaught, and soon entire areas had to be evacuated. Since then, the army has been fighting continuously, but there is a constant shortage of people. The guy looked at him in confusion, but all that really bothered him was why the game wasn't working. The soldier asked him his age. The guy thought about it. 21, I think. He nodded and said that now, according to new laws, people are called up to the army for 5 years. Previously, service lasted 3 years, but under the new conditions, the term was increased. The boy couldn't believe his ears. All he wanted upon his return was to play and relax. And now they're going to take him away for 5 years? This is not what John dreamed of at all. And then a notification sound is heard. The guy looks down at the phone screen. A new message. This is a summons. The date of the call-up is clearly and unambiguously stated, tomorrow. The guy asks the soldier with disbelief if this is really true. He explains with a slight sigh. There is an acute shortage of people in the country. He advises to go to the nearest computer club and check the notification through the system. The guy wonders why he didn't think of this right away. After his parents disappeared, he spent all his time at home playing games. When he was taken to Isgard, he was an ordinary 12th grader living in a virtual world. Games were his outlet, his lost paradise. He loved the computer club. All he needed was a little food and the opportunity to play. John walks inside the club, barely believing he can connect to the internet. He asks the waitress for a hot dog. He checks the information. In the end, everything the soldier said turned out to be true. On the screen is a summons. The first day of service is scheduled for tomorrow. He sighs heavily. If he had the power of dark magic left, he could clear dozens of dungeons by himself. But now his body seemed to be devoid of all demonic energy. Only crumbs of the former strength remain. Perhaps they will be enough to try to change something. He's determined to solve all the problems on his own. The streets are bustling with life. Loved ones say goodbye to each other. Parents hug their children. There are many men standing in line at the reception point. He notices how depressed their faces are. Everything seems different, even the army. He hopes that service here will not be as brutal as in Isgard. Now all he can do is wait for him to be given a suitable weapon. Soon the order is given to line up in formation, keeping your heads up. The commander demands that everyone push the person in front of him with such force as if their life depended on it. The guy casts a sarcastic glance in bewilderment, mentally noting that the local instructors clearly have a unique approach to training. Then the question is asked about those wishing to join the hunting party. The commander clarifies that hunters will be treated differently and that this unit will have high salaries. There is silence. No one raises their hand, but one person still speaks up. The commander notices him and points him forward. The guy, without hesitation, activates the rest of his power. He flies up to the ceiling in front of everyone, leaving behind a light stream of energy. He lands in front of the commander. John Kim firmly stated his intention to join the hunting party. Forgotten Canyon seemed completely abandoned. In its depths, there was a dungeon where there was a lonely man, a dark magician. He was thinking about the problems of dark magicians. To accumulate dark energy, it was necessary to destroy demonic monsters, to accumulate power in order to then spend it. However, this method was extremely disadvantageous. In addition, due to their bad reputation, it was almost impossible for dark mages to join a full-fledged combat squad. The guy was tormented by one question: how can a dark mage effectively accumulate demonic energy? He never received an answer to it. He sat in silence, lost in thought. The bodies of fallen monsters lay around. Perhaps no one answered because everyone who knew the answer was long dead. But suddenly he felt someone's presence. There was only one living person left in the dungeon, the boss. Why did he remain silent for so long? And finally, the monster appeared. All his children were killed, and he went into a rage. The guy thought with irony that perhaps this was the answer to his question. The monster rushed to attack, but he stopped it. Clenching his fist, he prepared to strike. His physical strength had been enhanced. He had reached his peak as a dark mage. At the time of the fight, there were 645 days left until his return to Earth. Later, in a military camp, the commander asked him his name. The guy was offered coffee. John Kim was asked to wait for command. The commander noticed that the recruit was full of enthusiasm and asked why he was so eager to join the unit. John replied that things were bad in the country and he had important business in the dungeon. The commander didn't understand what he was talking about, deciding that the new guy was just joking. But John himself was absolutely serious. All the dungeons were guarded by an army. The destruction of the monsters that escaped was the task of hunters, fighters with unique abilities. In the hunting party, one could quickly rise through the ranks if one could prove one's strength. John decided that by joining a hunting party, he would gain access to the dungeons. There, he could deal with the monsters on his own and gradually restore his strength. He sat there dreaming about the future, mentally counting the stars he could earn. Already in his mind's eye, he was clearing the dungeons of monsters. The plan seemed flawless to him. There was a knock at the door. The man who was expected came in. He was greeted. John was surprised. Why does the battalion commander address the sergeant as you? He was asked if he had hunter abilities and could open the status window. John was momentarily at a loss. There were status windows in Isgard too, but he rarely used them. Nothing there interested him. Now perhaps it would be worth looking into his own. He looked at his status window in bewilderment. The man nearby asked what he saw there. John didn't know what to answer. He said the window was giving an error. The man decided that the guy was just making fun of him. The events took place in the training center of the hunter squad, in a huge building where one of the recruits, a girl named Abby Bell, was invited. She was called by the battalion commander, whom she had not seen for a long time. The girl was surprised and admitted that she did not understand the reason for the call. She emphasized that she did not require special treatment, but the man assured that he had not invited her for this reason at all. He wanted to thank Abby for choosing to follow the path of a regular recruit despite her abilities. Abby thanked him for the kind words he said about her. While they were talking, a car pulled up to the building. The commander mentioned that he had received an interesting report and suggested that they take a look at one unusual candidate together. Abby Bell couldn't refuse. John Kim stood in front of the building looking at its size. He was puzzled by how much money had been invested in this huge structure. In his opinion, there should have been a computer club here. The man accompanying him reminded him that it was too early to relax. He had not yet been accepted. Special cases require a personal test, and this was one of them. The sergeant warned him that if the test showed him unfit, he would face a court-martial. John asked what the test was. They pointed out a massive object to him, a huge red lump. It was a scarlet stone, one of the heaviest and most durable minerals. The task is to move it at least 1 centimeter in 10 minutes. John was surprised by the simplicity of the test. The man looked at him suspiciously. He knew it was impossible to check someone else's status window, but he also knew that the military system was full of people who abused their power. He saw John effortlessly jump onto a 5-meter platform, and yet he refused to show his stats. It looked like a lie. The commander watched the boy along with Abby. He noted that during the selection process he had demonstrated unusual abilities, but now claims that his status was a mistake. Despite this, the commander had high hopes for him. John approached the Scarlet Stone. He knew that similar stones were found in the dungeons of Isgard. They were impossible to lift. They were used as barriers. He looked at his reflection in the smooth surface of the mineral and was sure that he could handle it easily. He swung and struck. The blow was crushing. Cracks appeared on the stone, and soon it crumbled into small pieces. Abby Bell was shocked. No one could understand how the rookie managed to destroy the Scarlet Stone. John looked at his hand in disappointment. There was no demonic energy inside the stone. He had hoped for more. Later, he was officially accepted into the academy and began training with other recruits. They knew that the training would be hard. After completing their studies, they would be sent straight into battle. So from the very first days, they were exhausted with training, preparing for the harsh realities. On the very first day, they were given weights in order to climb the ill-fated 6,000 steps. The instructor, who was known behind his back as the Devil, timed the ascent. The recruits felt that hard physical training was the only way to improve their performance. That's what everyone thought, until he showed up. The guy who easily broke all the established rules. They looked at him in surprise. He ran faster than the others. He easily overcame stairs and climbed slopes as if the weights weighed nothing. The guy was delighted with the food at the local canteen. Moreover, John liked absolutely everything here, from the food in the cafeteria to the regime. He especially liked the last point, rest and lights out. When he learned that the center had its own computer clubs, which were in no way inferior to the city ones, his delight knew no bounds. Here he could stay in shape, eat well, earn a great salary, and still find time for his favorite games. Life was a fairy tale. Every day he ran faster and faster, surprising his comrades more and more. They watched in amazement as he raced forward, leaving behind clouds of dust. The instructor was amazed. The weights didn't bother him at all. Typically, it took recruits an hour and a half to cover this distance. John finished the job in less than 30 minutes and received a well-deserved day off. The instructor admitted that he was the first in a long time to actually receive this privilege. However, he understood that he could not defeat the monsters with physical strength alone. And now he was going to personally observe this guy. Meanwhile, the rest of the recruits, exhausted and tired, complained about the workload. One of them happily reported that his stamina had increased by 1 unit. John, however, was at a loss as to what there was to be happy about. In Isgard, his stats increased by 10 units per day. When his comrades asked him how he was going to spend his day off, he admitted that he didn't know. They suggested that he probably trains hard in his spare time. John began to suspect that they were trying to befriend him. This was unexpected. In Isgard, they avoided him and hid their glances. And here there was interest, communication, even respect. And he liked it. Suddenly, someone shouted that the computer club was open. John couldn't believe his ears and, without wasting a second, rushed there. Sitting down at the computer, he realized with delight. The evening was scheduled until 9. You need to leave at least a couple of hours for sleep, but after Isgard, even an hour of rest seemed like a luxury. He firmly decided he would quench his thirst for games every day. At the next training session, John happily recalled how the day before he had pumped up 10 of his characters to the maximum. The others looked on in amazement as he showed no signs of fatigue again. They called him a monster. He just laughed, handing them bottles of water, saying that he couldn't leave his dear comrades without support. They begged him to share. He compared them to chickens, just as noisy and clumsy. At the next formation, everyone watched the lieutenant with a stern look. He said he was deeply disappointed that only half of the recruits had passed the standards in recent weeks. This platoon was the one lagging behind. John was surprised. The lieutenant spoke about himself in the third person, and this only increased the feeling of absurdity of what was happening. The lieutenant notes that with such an attitude, they will not be able to cope with the final stage of the training, preparation for work in the dungeon. Most dungeons disappear after all the monsters inhabiting them are killed. However, sometimes a dungeon remains in place. In this case, it becomes a volatile dungeon. Such a dungeon is suitable for training in field conditions, because in them you can experience all possible situations from the practice of a hunter. And training in such unchanging dungeons is called preparation for work in the dungeons. The boys are outraged that they will have to go there. They think that it will be the end for them. The lieutenant notices that they are getting nervous. He understands that a little seriousness wouldn't hurt the guys. He knows that recruits need to be treated like horses in a race. Sometimes a whip is needed to drive them forward. And he knows that sometimes you have to give a carrot. He informs that the recruit with the best dungeon score will get 3 days and 2 nights off. The lieutenant looks at the boys and tells them to rejoice. He says that 3 days and 2 nights is a lot. Why aren't they happy? The lieutenant doesn't understand why they don't respond to the word rest. Only John thinks this is a good reward. He likes everything. All the guys are in panic and horror about what is to come. They look at the portal and see that it is just huge. They don't know what they are supposed to do there. They are almost hit by a truck. They don't understand what a truck is doing there. John looks at the car with interest. He knows what it is. It's a cage. And as we know, animals are kept inside the cage. The boys were terrified. It was the first time they had seen a monster so close. John, however, considered the hounds to be harmless opponents. The commander, noticing their fear, reminded them that these were the very creatures they would have to face. He ordered them to split into groups of 4. Each group had to defeat at least 1 hound and return from the dungeon within an hour. The soldiers were informed about the training, the purpose of which was to strengthen their fighting spirit. The instructors gave instructions and led them forward. They were given special protective suits designed to protect the body in extreme conditions. The boys put on their gear. John expressed bewilderment at the high cost of the suit, claiming that it seemed to be saturated with the sweat and fear of its previous owner. He approached the lieutenant with a question. Would it be possible to take off the suit immediately after killing the hound? The lieutenant smiled and allowed him to take off his suit after completing the training, reminding him that this was a team task and that he did not have to do everything alone. After looking at his comrades, who in his opinion did not even know how to handle a weapon, John realized that the task would not be easy. He offered to explain how to deal with hounds. According to him, when attacking hounds, you need to remain calm, grab them by the paws, and break their spine. If this does not kill the enemy, tear him in half. John looked at his comrades with confidence, hoping that they understood his instructions. The command was given to release the hounds. The cage opened and the animals burst out, rushing towards the dungeon. John noticed that after a whole day in captivity, the monsters immediately ran home. His comrades agreed with his logic. When asked how he knew the ways of hounds so well, John replied that he himself had been a monster in the past. Their conversation was interrupted by the lieutenant, who announced that their team would go first. This came as a surprise to the fighters. The command was given and they moved forward. John decided that perhaps it was for the best. The sooner he completed the task, the sooner he could take off the uncomfortable suit. The lieutenant gave the instructors the command to monitor the situation and be ready to come to the rescue in case of danger. The instructors watched as the fighters entered the dungeon. The hounds already sensed the approach of people. John also felt the impending attack. Despite the enemy's numerical superiority, he was confident that he could cope alone. But it was a team effort. He announced to his friends that he was taking command. A pack of hounds rushed into battle. The boys were scared. John tried to cheer them up. They began to set up their shields. At that moment, one of the hounds rushed at John and he struck it and killed it. Then he saw one of his comrades calling for help. The hound glared at John. He kicked her, then disarmed another one and saved his comrade. John reminded the others that in a fight you can't stand still. You have to act first and attack. He explained to the guys that if this were a real sortie, 2 of them would already be dead. John pointed out the need to take advantage and aggressively attack the monsters. His behavior raised doubts among those watching. It seemed that he was not an ordinary recruit. Thanks to his guidance, the group was able to overcome their fear. One of the instructors even doubted it. Could it be that some sergeant was reborn in the body of a recruit? Another replied that such things only happen in books. John not only helped his comrades deal with the hounds, but also organize them. As a result, he received the highest score for preparation for work in the dungeon. The rest of the fighters received average scores. They were informed that the task was completed and they could leave. John asked the instructors when the scores would be announced. He also assumed that they were probably worried about the new recruits. Suddenly, ahead, right at the exit, something strange began to happen. The air seemed to tremble, a faint light flashed, and everyone froze, not knowing what to expect. The instructors were ordered by radio to immediately leave the dungeon. The recruits became frightened, thinking that an earthquake had occurred. But John realized that this was not so. The dungeon began to change. It was transforming right before his eyes. He explained to his comrades that they were in a changing dungeon and that it was being rebuilt. Suddenly, the entrance to the dungeon closed spontaneously. Panic gripped the fighters. They didn't understand what was happening. The instructors were confused. John realized that he couldn't get out now. Communication outside was lost. The radio was not working due to changes in the structure of the dungeon. The instructors admitted that the situation was out of control. The next transformation was scheduled for a month later, and no one expected it to happen sooner. However, they tried to reassure the new recruits by telling them that specialists outside were already working on a solution to the problem. John was puzzled. He knew that this dungeon had been chosen for training precisely because of its complete predictability. The fact that the exit had disappeared came as a surprise even to the management. He turned to the instructors and noticed that they were also nervous. John reminded that if the dungeon went into closed mode, it would only be possible to get out if special conditions were met. He had seen something similar before. In Isgard, the instructors discussed the situation. One of them noted that the disappearance of the exit is possible in two cases, either after a complete clearing of the dungeon, or in the case of its transformation into a closed type. Then the exit disappears immediately after entering. At that moment, monsters appeared in the dungeon. The instructors explained that the only way to get out was to destroy every single one of them. They realized the seriousness of the situation. 4 recruits with no combat experience and 2 instructors, that's the whole team. The instructors realized that they would have to go through the dungeon with this group. They had to move while they still had strength. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to withstand even the onslaught of ordinary goblins. The instructor came to the conclusion that it was necessary to use protective suits at full capacity. The cadets were to go forward and take the first blow while the instructors attacked the distracted monsters. However, the recruits spoke out against it. They couldn't accept that they were being used as cannon fodder. John was thinking about something. One of the instructors noticed this and asked if everything was okay. At that moment, a strange noise was heard and everyone turned around. Suddenly, the instructor felt ill and foam started coming out of his mouth. John saw the corporal run towards his friend in panic and try to stop him. The second instructor also became ill. John immediately ordered the others to remain where they were and not come any closer to avoid the same fate. He approached the bodies. The smell coming from them was familiar to him. He ordered his comrades to stay at the entrance and keep an eye on the instructors. They watched John rush forward and thought he had lost his mind. They thought he was heading for certain death. But John was glad. He recognized that smell. Demonic energy. The same one that made the instructors feel sick. John knew that for ordinary people she was dangerous, but for dark magicians she was like energy for a battery. Ahead, a purple flame flickered, the source of demonic energy. John walked towards him. There was silence all around. Suddenly there was a sound. He saw a huge creature. It was a dark hound, much stronger and more dangerous than the usual one. He first encountered her a year after arriving in Asgard. Meeting her here gave him an almost nostalgic feeling. He prepared to strike her. The blow was so strong that it broke her teeth. The smell of blood made him sick. After her death, a cloud of demonic energy burst out from her body. This is what made them so dangerous. Contact with the blood of a hound caused the skin of ordinary people to rot. John looked at his hands. This was not happening to him. Energy was filling him. He wondered why such a hound was here. The instructor's reaction confirmed that such encounters are extremely rare. The probability of a dark hound's interdimensional transition was negligible. Only a very powerful mage could do it, or a priest who wields divine power. Maybe he was just winding himself up. He looked around. He needed the hound's body for the report. The instructors regained consciousness. The recruits were in shock, not understanding what had happened. The men asked if everything was okay. One of the fighters reported that John had gone to explore the dungeon alone. The instructor realized that John should have been expelled from the training center according to regulations. But he also realized that he, as a mentor, was supposed to protect the recruits, and instead he had passed out. At this moment, one of the fighters noticed the movement. John emerged from the tunnel with the hound's body on his shoulders. The instructors were amazed. They had never seen such a creature. John threw the body at their feet. It became clear that it was because of this hound that the instructors felt ill. The recruits looked at him in amazement. They couldn't believe that he had dealt with such a monster alone. The portal has finally opened. One of the instructors asked John if he had really killed the hound himself. John evaded the answer. The instructor ordered his partner to lead the fighters out while he himself stayed behind with John. When they were alone, he told John to personally report everything to the lieutenant after leaving the dungeon without hiding a single detail, including the instructor's mistakes. He felt ashamed that they left the recruits unprotected. He acknowledged that everything ended well only thanks to John and expressed gratitude. John said he was embarrassed by it. To this, the instructor replied that a real man should be able to admit his mistakes. The boy watched him leave. John realized that the last week of training had been especially intense. Suddenly, a notification caught his attention. His status had changed. A note appeared. Error corrected. He didn't understand what the error was, but the changes were obvious. He was especially confused by the appearance of the phrase, "The founder of the cult of Sister Lumi is the best character." It seemed strange and out of place. Lumi was a heroine from the game Ultimate Dungeon Brawler, and John actually created a cult in her honor as a joke. But now it was reflected in his status. Everything that was happening seemed absurd to him. He looked at his stats. They were much worse than expected. There was only one skill left, Corruption E, and it was so weak that it only caused stomach pain. Even in fantasy novels, something like this looked more impressive. John understood that with his current capabilities, he would not be able to achieve his goals. However, he was not going to give up. Since he had managed to achieve the maximum in the game, he would be able to repeat the success here. His new goal is to regain his strength as quickly as possible in order to save the gaming company. Meanwhile, chaos reigned in the training center. No one could believe that John had single-handedly destroyed the Dark Hound. These conversations did not subside. John arrived to report. The lieutenant invited him in. Inside the room, John saw a man standing on his head. The lieutenant explained that he was responsible for checking the dungeon and received the punishment he deserved. After a short silence, the lieutenant informed John that he had a proposition for him. He compared the young man to a heron among chickens, one who stands out from the rest. He admitted that John was an unusual man and that the army would lose a lot if it sent him to the regular forces. The lieutenant noted that he had heard of John's desire to advance in the ranks. According to regulations, a recruit cannot receive a rank in the first year, but he is willing to make an exception. John was surprised to hear the offer to join a hunting party in Shervon. In exchange, he was offered a chance to advance. The lieutenant thought that he might have gone too far in assuming that the boy would agree to such a dangerous position. He remembered that Shervon was the 104th dungeon squad of the Invulnerable. Harsh climate, constant snowfalls, sudden appearances of monsters, and extreme conditions. However, for John, this proposal was ideal. He replied that the place of service did not matter as long as he had the opportunity to advance. This suited his plan. Surprised by John's determination, the lieutenant gave the go-ahead. A car soon arrived at the training center. Friends asked John not to forget them and to contact them immediately upon arrival. He promised that he would definitely let them know about himself. The guys couldn't believe that he was really leaving for Shervon. John replied that he simply had different goals and greater ambitions. When the last of the noisy comrades left, everything around became quiet. John was left alone. A truck pulled up to the center. A man approached John and said that he was delayed due to the snowfall. John noted with surprise that it was too early for snow, but followed him and climbed into the back of the truck. On the way, he thought, as soon as they reached the base, the real soldier's life would begin. But he was worried about only one thing, the initiation ritual. He knew he would just have to be patient and endure. The landscape outside the window was covered with snow. Winter reigned all around. Upon arrival, the man led John inside and introduced him to the fighters. John asked the fighters to show him where everything was. They looked at the newcomer with interest and immediately asked his name. John quickly realized that these two seemed to be in charge here. He couldn't understand why they were looking at him with such a strange expression, almost with admiration, as if he were some kind of toy. One of the guys asked why John had come to Shervon. He replied that he had heard that it was on the front lines that it was easiest to gain combat experience. His interlocutors were perplexed. They thought he was a little downcast. In response, they asked him to show them something he could do. John suggested one-finger push-ups. The guys responded condescendingly, saying that it was nothing special, they could do it all day long. However, when John actually stood on one toe and started doing vertical push-ups, their eyes widened. In their squad, perhaps only one could do this. The idiot, as they called the sergeant. And as if on command, the cheerful scene was interrupted by a voice from behind. The man standing behind turned out to be that very sergeant. John recognized the voice. He had encountered this man before. It was Sergeant Tom Roth. The sergeant made a couple of humorous remarks threatening to put them to work on his subordinates, after which he lay down on the bed and turned on the phone, deciding to watch the news. John noted to himself that even in such a remote place, representatives of different ranks had gathered. And what was interesting was that almost all of them were under 30. At this time, Private First Class Sun Jin was ordered to brief John. The recruit was surprised. Why was he lower in rank if he looked older? Sun Jin suggested going to the soldier's store and promised to pay for the purchases. John thought he was a nice guy. John asked why they couldn't go to the store whenever they wanted. It turned out that soldiers with a rank below first class can visit the store no more than 3 times a week. Only those with a rank of first class and above are allowed access to the gym and computer club. This news did not please John. He asked if there really was no way around this rule. Sun Jin replied that he had to at least rise to the rank of corporal or sergeant, and that was very difficult. He himself had failed the exams more than once. John decided that once he achieved promotion, he would pull Sun Jin along with him. Another soldier approached them and asked with resentment why they were eating without him. Sun Jin called him to join. That guy ate with great appetite, as if he hadn't eaten all day. John didn't understand who he was. The new interlocutor warned, if they show a bad result at the shooting range tomorrow, they should consider themselves dead. Sun Jin was just about to tell John about the shooting. The sergeant, meanwhile, became ill. The guys began asking with concern in their voices what had happened, trying to understand why he was so confused and pale. He winced slightly and replied that he might have eaten something wrong because he began to feel slight discomfort in his stomach. He started looking for the expiration date on the package and asked the others not to linger. John thought perhaps his weak skill Corruption E still has a use, albeit a trivial one. He asked Sun Jin to tell him more about the shooting range. He explained that he would have to shoot from a rifle with reinforced cartridges. The weapon is powerful. The recoil is strong, like a cannon. Here in Shervon, monsters appear more often than in other regions, and therefore the weapons used are appropriate. Sun Jin compared the weapon to an unbroken horse. John liked the comparison. He even thought, if there is a long-range weapon, then perhaps there will be something like an elephant. He was looking forward to the next day so he could finally go to the shooting range. The next day, the weather was clear. The platoon went to the shooting range. Each fighter was given a weapon for training. Their task was to hit targets which depicted various creatures. John noted one miss with slight disappointment. After the shooting was completed, the instructor gave the command to stop. 19 hits and only 1 miss. The soldiers looked at each other in surprise. Someone joked that John must have a built-in auto-aiming device in his eye, while another noted that his personal best was 14 hits, which was already above average. Such figures seemed incredible to them. The platoon commander and logistics officer noted John as a true genius. The boys peppered John with questions, trying to figure out how he had achieved such a result. John replied that he had carefully studied the instructions, but the boys just chuckled. There were no instructions. The instructor praised John, noting that this was a great start for a beginner, and informed him of an additional training session scheduled for the evening. Some soldiers began to tease the newcomer, saying that now he would have to undergo special training. Others, on the contrary, admired him, saying that if he had hit 20 times, he would have even received a day off. John didn't understand what was so special about this extra training. He couldn't imagine that in the army he would have to do something he had never even dreamed of. Sun Jin apologized for not warning them. They usually don't take newcomers there and assured them that they would explain everything on the spot. The essence of the training was to go through an obstacle course as part of teams. 2 teams competed against each other, overcoming obstacles, fighting simulated monsters, and avoiding hitting mock civilians. The winner is the one who clears the route faster and more accurately, completing it by pressing the red button. After the shooting had finished, when the echo of the shots had not yet died down in their ears, everyone silently headed to the dining room, hoping to finally get some rest and have a bite to eat. At dinner, Sun Jin admitted that John was a natural soldier. John supported him, noting that 13 hits was quite a decent result. He told John about Sergeant Lee, the squad's best marksman, who averaged 17 hits. John was sure that he was the best one here now. Sun Jin assured that John would be able to handle the evening training as well. John suggested that they form a team since they were split into pairs. But Sun Jin replied that the distribution was done by the management, and the chances of being in the same group were like winning the lottery. Soon the command was given. Prepare for training, put on body armor, line up. John, putting on his bulletproof vest, noticed the mocking look of his future partner, Sergeant Burns. He did not hide his skepticism. Supposedly, the difference in level between them is radical. He emphasized that from a private to a sergeant is like from the earth to the moon. Sergeant Burns warned John that he had 3 minutes to cross the strip. If you don't meet the deadline, there will be consequences. John remained silent, but this irritated Burns. Forced to speak, John promised he would try. The sergeant didn't need effort, he needed results. At this time, the first training session began. The soldiers watched the symbols representing enemies. The more dangerous the monster, the larger the icon. The first enemy was a giant toad that attacked with a long tongue. The second participant encountered a huge rat. The first one confidently cleared his route and was the first to reach the finish line. 2 minutes 24 seconds. His result exceeded all expectations and became a new record. He jokingly reproached his rival for missing the civilian model. The platoon discussed a bet between them. The loser treats the winner. John liked the idea of a bet and offered Sergeant Burns the same. Burns just chuckled but soon agreed, adding a condition. If John lost, he would give him 3 months' salary. John knew he was taking a risk, but excitement got the better of him. When they were called, John thought that it was not worth giving in to a cheap provocation. The soldiers behind him were discussing, what's the point of a bet if John has no chance? But suddenly Sun Jin noticed something strange. The ground began to shake. The soldiers thought it was an earthquake, but when they looked at the monster's scale, they froze. The icon was huge. From the darkness, John saw a monster that had devoured the previous monster. It was terrifying. A giant eye, curved horns, a huge body. John looked up at him. Seeing a man, it rushed to attack. But John wasn't going to back down. He knew that the sooner he finished the fight, the sooner he could go to dinner. To the side, he noticed a mock-up of a civilian. Hitting it was unacceptable. The huge monster emitted deafening screams. John didn't understand what was making him scream like that, but after he dealt a strong blow, he noticed how the scream suddenly weakened. This made him happy. Now the monster didn't seem so loud anymore. John watched the monster carefully. It towered before him with its entire terrifying body. The sergeants in the command center couldn't believe their eyes. In front of them was a new recruit, face to face with a monster. Someone noticed that it was a one-eyed demon, otherwise known as a devouring one, a creature capable of absorbing energy, greatly enhancing its own regeneration and attack power. He usually didn't attack first, only when his life was in danger. But what did this guy do? Meanwhile, John continued to fight. He rained blows down on the monster, but suddenly remembered that this was a shooting range and pulled out his weapon. Several well-aimed shots damaged the monster's eye. John knew he had a chance to finish him off before his vision returned. The monster roared in pain but remained dangerous. One of the blows passed within centimeters of John's head. Even blind, the demon sensed his location. The guy realized that the creature sensed his dark magic. John realized that the time had come to use it right now. The instructor watched in confusion. He knew that the private could not cope with such an opponent. The man rushed to help, mentally praying that John would hold on. Sergeant Burns, meanwhile, was approaching the finish line. He was already mentally spending the money he had won. There is a red button in front of my eyes, and John is next to it. He was already standing at the finish line and, throwing a mocking glance in his direction, pressed the button. Burns froze, his dreams of victory and a day off shattered. Upon arriving at the scene, the instructor saw the body of a dead monster. There was applause all around. No one had ever completed the extra training session in 2 minutes before. Everyone was discussing how the rookie had single-handedly dealt with the one-eyed demon. Burns was seething with anger, clenching his fists and barely containing the anger that was ready to burst out at the first word. He claimed that the victory was unfair. John killed only one monster, although the training conditions required eliminating 2. He was sure that he would have won 2 if he had only one opponent. John remained silent, but noted to himself how disgusting the sergeant seemed to him. When Burns grabbed one of the privates by the collar, John decided that this could not be left any longer. But before he could intervene, Burns was distracted by someone's voice. It was Sergeant Tom Roth. He said the recruit was in grave danger and Burns should be ashamed of his words. Roth noted that the one-eyed demon in its normal state does not pose a serious threat. However, when mutated, its level of danger increases several times. He added that it was easier to deal with 2 standard monsters than with this mutated creature. Sergeant Burns was stunned that anyone dared to contradict him. Roth demanded an explanation, but Burns didn't know what to say. He paused and called the whole thing a joke. This was followed by a sharp response. He always starts joking when he finds himself in a disadvantageous position. Tom Roth also noted that high rank is very convenient, especially when you can see how someone who was previously dominant is now forced to meekly retreat. John watched this in silence, not fully understanding what exactly had happened. Burns was seething with shame and anger, feeling his face flush with heat and his insides contracting with humiliation and powerlessness. He reluctantly had to admit his defeat, lowering his eyes and feeling the bitterness of failure rise in his throat. The guy, having cast one last glance at him, left, leaving behind a heavy silence. Later, while cleaning up, the fighters discussed what had happened. They said that Sergeant Roth had recently been promoted to 2nd class, supposedly for his outstanding performance on the exam. John expressed doubt. In his opinion, such a category no longer exists. Sung Jin explained that rumors say it was because a junior sergeant who was up for promotion died in the dungeon. Bell also nearly lost his life in the same incident. John asked if more such extraordinary promotions were possible. They answered that yes, when rescuing civilians in an emergency or in the event of eliminating monsters that exceed the standard size. He understood that no matter how much he wanted to advance, he could not wish misfortune on civilians. Lost in thought, John and his companions soon heard an alarming announcement. His signal made John Kim very happy. Middlebats, flying monsters resembling giant bats, were spotted at the oil depot. Their danger lay not only in their size, but also in their ability to throw fireballs. Although they weren't too strong individually, their appearance at the oil depot could have been disastrous. The security guards on site were in a panic as they watched a flock of middlebats circling above them. One of them reached for a weapon, but his partner stopped him. It was dangerous to shoot near the oil depot. They didn't know what to do if the shields weren't set up in time and the monsters got closer. And then they noticed John. He stepped forward, declaring that he would draw the monsters towards himself. The guards shouted that he had no equipment and no chance. John replied that he didn't have time to take it. He looked at the approaching creatures and understood this was his chance. He activated dark magic. After the last battle, her level increased slightly. He felt the middlebats reacting to his energy. The monsters circled in the air, heading straight for him. Now they were his target. Meanwhile, the soldiers were preparing protective shields. One of them saw what was happening and, not believing his eyes, froze. The sergeant called out to his subordinates, demanding that they immediately continue the installation. This was not the time to look at what was happening. John Kim fought against an entire pack single-handedly, demonstrating strength and determination. The sergeant was angry. While the recruit took charge, they stood by, helplessly watching. John had no qualms about tearing apart middlebats with his bare hands. He understood that destroying them one by one was not the most rational solution. While searching for a more effective way, he heard someone calling out to him. It was the sergeant who was shouting at John to duck and leave the combat zone immediately, reminding him that he had no armor or equipment. But John had no intention of retreating. He knew all these monsters were now his, and only he was capable of destroying them. The sergeant was about to enter the battle, but suddenly felt a sharp pain in his stomach. He was barely holding back when John came up to him. After making sure the sergeant was okay, he politely asked to borrow his weapon. John understood that it would be much easier to fight with such a weapon. Having received the electric rod in his hands, the guy, not hiding his joy, rushed back into battle. He moved as fast as lightning, cutting through middlebats left and right. His movements were sudden and precise. The soldiers watched in amazement as the rookie single-handedly held off an entire pack. Suddenly, one of the middlebats broke through into the territory of the oil depot, releasing a blazing fireball from its mouth. The command was given to open fire. One of the soldiers was about to shoot, but John got ahead of him and destroyed the monster before it could do any harm. John glanced at the soldier, said only that it was bad to play with fire, and disappeared again into the whirlwind of movement. The soldiers couldn't believe their eyes. He covered tens of meters at inhuman speed, leaving behind only flashes of light and clouds of dust. Meanwhile, the defense system was activated. A protective dome covered the territory of the oil depot. The ground was littered with the bodies of fallen middlebats. The sergeant watched in stupefaction as the scene unfolded, counting the bodies, about 30. He couldn't understand why their radars hadn't picked up the approaching threat. He was also outraged by the absence of a duty commander. The commander praised Sergeant Roth, confident that it was he who destroyed the enemies with the electric rod. However, he waved it off and explained that the entire operation was John's merit. According to him, it was John who single-handedly dealt with the monsters, using someone else's weapons and his own strength. The command did not believe it. One person could not do this. At that moment, John himself came up to return the weapon. Later in the commander's office, he listened to severe reprimands. The officer stressed that such actions, even if successful, could have ended in tragedy. He recalled that the Hunter Squad is a special structure consisting exclusively of the awakened, not only fighters, but also analysts, scientists, strategists. Each is selected solely based on results and skills. John was disappointed. He expected praise but got a lecture. The battalion commander asked ironically what he had hoped for, and then he added that today a man from the 104th Squad would arrive at the unit, one of the best hunters who had destroyed a record number of monsters. The entire team was preparing to meet him. Sergeant Roth was even recognized for his competent actions and received a commendation. John watched the hunter arrive and was greatly impressed. The man came up and shook John's hand. His grip was strong and confident, the kind that sticks in your mind. After greeting, the captain announced that everyone could now rest a little. Later at a meeting, he asked if they had managed to determine the location of the gate from which the middlebats had entered. He was informed that the area was under surveillance, but the exact location of the gate was still being studied. The captain asked if there had been any problems with the radar. He was told that the alarm had not gone off until the middle bats had penetrated the detachment's position. The captain assumed that if it wasn't the equipment, then it was the number of enemies, and ordered 2 more radars to be installed. The order was immediately put into effect. He then turned to John. He thanked him for his courage and quick response, but made a remark that he should not engage in combat without equipment. John apologized. The captain chuckled and said it was a joke, and asked again if he had really destroyed all 30 middle bats single-handedly. When he received confirmation, he praised the soldier and added with a smile that the division commander would probably owe John a gift. John was surprised when the commander announced his promotion. The captain noted that such decisions are not made often, but outstanding results deserve immediate reward. In addition to the promotion, John received 3 days of leave, which he was especially happy about. He had not even hoped for such a reward. Hawk praised John. He had only just arrived and had already distinguished himself. The commander confirmed that thanks to John's actions, he himself had received many flattering reviews. In response, John thanked him and added that he didn't yet know how to use his vacation. The house was in a controlled area, and there was no internet in the city, so he decided not to go anywhere and stay in the city, saving time and resources. Meanwhile, 2 men in the city were discussing the soldiers. One of them said that he did not intend to go into the cave and would simply collect dried spruce nearby. Another noted that the mountain smelled of poison and that it was dangerous to go there. The first one suggested putting on a gas mask. They fell silent when they saw a military man approaching. It was John. He thanked them for giving him a ride. The men asked with interest if it was true that he could sort out the situation on the mountain. John confidently promised that access would be restored tomorrow. The men, surprised, wished him luck and asked him to be careful. There was a thick, poisonous fog in front of the mountain. John, leaving everything, including his favorite games, arrived here knowing for sure. The reason is demonic energy. The entrance was guarded by soldiers in gas masks, but John knew that on the other side, through the dungeon, the security was weaker. Realizing that he was still a soldier and should not be caught, he quietly used a curse on the guard. One of the soldiers complained of a sharp pain in his stomach and temporarily left his post. John took advantage of this moment and entered inside. He was surprised. No presence of monsters. However, demonic energy was everywhere. He desperately needed it. While absorbing the energy, he noticed that once he reached a certain level of magic, his ability, Decomposition, became stronger, and a new skill, Night Wanderer, was unlocked. This discovery brought genuine joy to John. John was glad to receive the skill Night Wanderer. He believed that this skill was a perfect match for his gifted magic. The Nightwalker is a creature that takes the form of a shadow. Its primary ability is to sneak up on and eliminate its target. This skill has been known since the days of Isgard, so John was glad to see it. Maintaining the summoning required a constant supply of magical energy, but John knew the creature was worth the effort. He summoned it, and the Night Wanderer appeared. Surprisingly, the creature turned out to be tiny. John couldn't figure out why. Was it the penalty for interdimensional travel, or a lack of magical energy? He was frustrated, not understanding where he could use a creature that seemed about to melt from the sunlight. Suddenly, he wondered, maybe it can hide in the shadows. The creature asked for food. Later, John reported to the sergeant about his return from leave. His fellow soldiers asked him if he was the hunter who had completed his service as a private with the best results. He handed the bag to Sun Jin and there was lotion inside. He thanked him. Sergeant Burns soon appeared. He made fun of the boys and asked if John had completed his assignment. Having received confirmation, he stated that he would now treat John with respect. As they passed the administrative office, the boys noticed a list of candidates for the final exam. John's name was on it. This caused confusion. After all, he had not studied for almost a year. Some teased him, saying that the younger one was not up to the test. John explained that the battalion commander had offered him an early test. It was a promotion test. Burns thought John was crazy to expect to pass him. One of the guys noted that those who take the exam on Saturday are trained with basic weapons the day before. John didn't understand what kind of weapon they were talking about and how it differed from a rifle. Later, the commander told about the structure of the exam, written and practical parts. The first part could be passed by knowing the basics, but in practice, skill was important. John decided to prepare seriously. During the formation, the soldiers were ordered to take up arms. The commander said that he would teach the basics of fencing and combat leadership. The instructor demonstrated the techniques, and John understood why all this was necessary. One rifle would not save him in a fight with a monster. He began to train. It turned out that fencing in Isgard was more effective. John demonstrated his skill, surprising the others. After finishing his workout, he took a dramatic knee. The instructor told John to go up to the podium and held him up as an example. John repeated the techniques, causing surprise among those around him. After training, John rested. The instructor praised him and discreetly passed him a cookie. John was surprised. Did he really always carry them with him? Sun Jin approached him and asked him to show the movements again. John could not refuse his friend and agreed to help. He realized that Sun Jin's problem was not technique, but lack of confidence. John knew that when the time came, he would help him become a great hunter. Saturday arrived, the day of the promotion exam. Some of the guys were watching TV, others were playing basketball, and some were into checkers. Suddenly, a voice came from the speaker. All hunters taking the exam are requested to come to the stadium. The boys immediately paid attention. John also heard the announcement and headed to the stadium. The examinees lined up in neat rows in the stadium, trying to remain calm. The junior lieutenant was responsible for lining up and checking those present. Everyone listened attentively to his instructions. A bus pulled up to the stadium. The order was given to quickly and orderly take seats in the bus. The junior lieutenant reminded that the exams would be held in the 105th Division, and they were going to the city where it was stationed. During the trip, examinees were strongly advised not to waste time and solve problems from previous exam tests in order to refresh their knowledge and prepare for the upcoming test. John overheard a conversation between several guys. They discussed that even the 4th Battalion would arrive for the exam, which meant there would be female hunters. Paul Reed confidently declared that today he would definitely demonstrate to them his skills in handling weapons, which he had been honing for a whole year. The guys joked that getting a phone number from a girl would be a difficult task. John silently wished them luck. The bus arrived at the headquarters of the 105th Division. The group was directed to the room designated for the written exam. After the test was completed, the results were announced. The examiner reported that in the 2nd Battalion of the 105th Division, everyone passed the test except one, Paul Reed. Orders were given for everyone except Paul to proceed to the practical part of the exam. Reed realized that his chance to impress the girls was gone. The boys chuckled as they recalled how he claimed that the written test was easier than the driver's license exam. John thought about it. Nearby, Abby Bell watched as the boys left the building. At the site of the practical exam, the hunters were greeted by examiners. Lieutenant Colonel Hodges was in charge of the exam. He reminded that the exam was not just a way to improve the level, but a serious test. He called on everyone to fight fairly and act in good faith. It was also announced that one of the examinees had passed the test with special distinction, Private John Kim. Abby listened to this message with interest. John wondered if there was anyone else who had passed the exam at the same level. The second exam has begun. This test required moving a tall, strong man using only physical force. For John, this task reminded him of the Red Rock test. The first to be called was a private from the 103rd Division, a strong, tall guy. He tried his best to move the instructor, but the instructor easily pushed him back with a single movement of his shoulder. The private received 0 points and was eliminated from the exam. The examiner warned that if the participant did not score at least 100 points, his exam would be considered failed. The selection began. One by one, the participants left the test. No one managed to move the man. Then it was Abby's turn. She scored 50 points, which allowed her to move on. The girl managed to push the instructor 5 meters away. The boys watched her with admiration, noting her strength and beauty. Someone mentioned that she was the daughter of the division commander. John wondered if she had also received a special distinction along with him. John was called next. He understood that this time the trick, like with the stone, would not work. Simply hitting the man would not work. Then he had an idea. If he could push it 10 meters, he might get bonus points. Gathering all his strength, John pushed the man. He flew back and fell to his knees, breaking the floor. John Kim got 100 points. He was pleased with the result. Abby turned her attention to him. The exam continued. The participants dropped out one after another. The instructor then announced that the test was over and the dexterity test was about to begin. Those who did not pass the selection were asked to leave the room. The room was prepared for the next test. The net and gun were installed. The participants were surprised that they would really have to dodge gunfire. The examiners explained that the bullets would be rubber, but the impact would still be painful. They were also told that the main goal was to stay within the net for a minute. John thought about it. This test was new to him. The man at the control panel controlled the cannon. The maximum result was 1 minute without going beyond the limits and dodging shots. The instructor informed the participants that although this was a test of agility, it could be passed by simply standing for a minute. In this case, the result would also be counted. The test began. John heard Sun Jin's voice speaking to him. He asked if John really thought he would fail the test of strength. The guy noted that everyone present, with the exception of John, had already passed the promotion test. There were almost no people here who had failed the skills test. John heard a piece of advice from a friend. Rubber bullets fly almost like real ones, so there is no point in trying to see and go around each one. It is much more important to watch the movement of the muzzle and predict the trajectory of the shot. John began to observe what was happening. One of the privates was wounded. He was helped up and told that he was out of the test. John thought the level of requirements for the skills test was clear, but he still couldn't understand why they were so picky about the participants. Another private has been knocked out of the test. The instructor called them weaklings and noted that a sergeant's exam was taking place at a nearby training ground, which was not comparable in difficulty to the current one. He wondered how they were going to advance in rank with that level of training. One by one, the corporals dropped out of the test. Abby was next up, stretching and straightening up before she started. The boys watched with interest as she deftly dodged the flying bullets. Her movements were confident and coordinated. Everyone watched her with their mouths open. Abby showed a great result and returned to action. John noticed that she was looking at him again. He didn't understand why he had caught her attention. John was next called to the test. Abby watched him go. He felt her gaze literally burning into his back, and it made him slightly uneasy. John got ready. Bullets flew in his direction. Abby watched him with obvious concern. John stood still, not moving. He decided to demonstrate the difference in skill level. The participants did not understand how this was possible. The bullets were flying straight at him, and he deftly dodged them while simultaneously moving forward. Abby was shocked. The instructor was also surprised by what was happening and gave the command to stop shooting. He announced that John Kim had received the highest score on the agility test. He stood with a victorious look. The rank and file lined up to hear the test results. They were informed that the next and final test would be a physical ability test that would take place in the dungeon. During this time, it was necessary to reach the turning point and receive a seal on the back of the hand from the instructor. The only problem was that no one knew how far away this point was. John thought about it. He couldn't understand why no one was regulating the pace. Everyone was acting cautiously. He wondered what would happen if he ran alone. Abby appeared next to him. The girl looked in his direction and then rushed forward. John decided to take up the challenge and try to overtake her. Abby ran very fast. John also picked up speed. The other candidates couldn't understand how he was moving forward so quickly. She rushed purposefully, not paying attention to anything around her. Abby suddenly noticed that John had caught up with her. He noted that she was running so-so. Abby didn't understand what he meant, and John had already overtaken her. The girl looked after him angrily and remembered why she was here. She recalled how her friends often reproached her for the fact that she was the daughter of a general, and therefore everything came easy to her. She was considered arrogant and was said to be envious of her supposedly perfect military life. Everyone was sure that she was the commander's favorite. These words hurt her. She wondered what kind of person John was, the one who was rumored to have broken the diamond. She trained as hard as she could. Her team achieved high results and set records. One day, a friend came into their room and told them that their morning record had been broken after lunch. The girls were outraged. The new record was 1 minute 2 seconds. It seemed impossible. They had no idea who could have planted it until they learned it was John Kim of the 4th Platoon. Abby knew immediately who they were talking about. The girls discussed how John Kim had fired several full shots without any special weapon and had broken the record. Abby heard it said that he ran twice as fast as the others and didn't even break a sweat. As she fell asleep, she heard talk of John Kim catching a hound the size of an elephant in a dungeon. Abby just wanted to rest. But thoughts of John kept her awake. Abby remembered how her father dressed. In her eyes, he was always the embodiment of strength. When she was little, she would run up to him and silently watch, greedily catching his attention. The father extended his hand to her and, without saying a word, stroked her head, then left. Abby remained standing, watching him. Now lying on the bed, she promised herself again to become strong. Strong, like him. In the battalion commander's office, she was called by name, Hunter Abby Bell. The commander asked where she would like to continue her service and noted her excellent academic performance. He said that she could become the best student in the volunteer division. Abby thought about it. She remembered General Sun's 101st Division. John Kim, she said out loud. The commander was surprised. Abby clarified where exactly trainee John Kim was serving. Now, running after him, she realized that she had not volunteered for fun. Then she had flared up and behaved like a child. Now she saw clearly, this man was simply driving her crazy. She recalled his many victories. At some point, Abby realized that she was simply jealous of him. But I wanted to become strong. Not the best, not the first, but strong. Without my father's help. And if there is a really strong person in front of her, she should not be angry, but learn. She ran as fast as she could to catch up with him and apologize. When she arrived, John was already receiving a confirmation stamp. The instructor also praised her for her excellent speed. John bragged about his seal and said with a grin that he almost fell asleep while he was waiting for it. Abby instantly flared up. Having barked at the instructor to put the seal on quickly, she realized that nothing had changed in her. His face still irritates her. Out of breath, she could hardly stand on her feet while John looked completely unperturbed. The instructor announced the results. First place went to John Kim with a time of 29 minutes. Second place went to Abby Bell with 32 minutes. Abby was still proud of herself, even though she dreamed of being first. The battalion commander noted that John's indicators were at their maximum. He thanked him politely. The tests are over. All the hunters who passed the tests were called to gather at the testing ground by 13 o'clock. Abby, tired, picked up her things. John stuck his tongue out at her. The girl's eyes widened. She watched him go, and a pang of regret stabbed her inside. She had fallen for his provocation again, and lost again. But this time it even made her smile slightly. She took a deep breath and raised her face to the sun. The girl put on her jacket and walked firmly after everyone. At the 105th Division's 2nd Headquarters training ground, Sun Jin was surrounded by monsters. He held a sword in his hand. The monsters were growling. Some were already dead. He wiped the sweat from his forehead. One of the monsters jumped at him. He kicked it with all his might. The second one crept up from behind, but Sun Jin turned around in time and struck with his blade. John Kim watched him from the side. One monster was wounded, the other was unharmed. 2 against 1, Sung Jin thought. Maybe he still doubted himself. He looked gloomy as he left the training ground. Now it was John Kim's turn. He was determined. Today he had to earn the rank of corporal. He promised himself to get rid of all the bad habits that were still with him. Abby and the others followed him. John had only a bat studded with nails in his hand and walked out into the arena smiling. The instructor did not understand why he had chosen such a seemingly ineffective weapon. He thought it would be difficult to handle. However, John, on the contrary, believed that this was exactly what was needed in this test. 3 angry monsters with clubs came out to meet him. John smiled. This was something new. The monsters rushed towards him, and he calmly watched their approach. John tightened his grip on his bat. He resembled a rabbit about to be attacked by an eagle. And when the monsters were almost at his feet, John dealt a crushing blow. The monster disappeared in a cloud of dust, leaving only tatters of it. In 4 seconds, it had dealt with all 3. The command was amazed. No one could believe that such a skilled hunter served in the 104th Division. With such results, he could have received the highest scores on all tests, and yet he was still only a private. John's comrades supported him with loud shouts. Abby looked on in surprise. Feeling her gaze, John turned around. Their eyes met, and he smiled. John was pleased. Today he became the hero of the day. However, such self-confidence angered Abby. She found it incomprehensible how anyone could be so impudent. At the formation, the successes of all participants were noted. John Kim was singled out in particular, which he was happy about. He was no longer a private, but a corporal. The battalion commander noted his rapid growth, calling him his treasure, and wished him to continue in the same spirit. After receiving the report, the commander was pleased. He was surprised that a simple private had received the highest score on the practical test. John's fellow soldiers praised him and asked him not to be too hard on them when he became a sergeant. John promised to think about it depending on their behavior. As the platoon left the test site, John turned around. He spotted Abby. She had also passed the test. Abby looked at him with interest. John wondered, had she been promoted too? He got on the bus but continued to look in her direction. The girl finally decided to apologize. But when she noticed John making gestures that she would regret it if she started arguing again, she was stunned. Abby's eyes widened in indignation. She looked angrily after the departing bus. Deep down, she thought John Kim was a real rude guy. On the bus, the boys teased John about a possible relationship with Abby. They joked that she only had eyes for him the whole time. John admitted that they had argued a little and he had teased her a little. The boys didn't quite understand what he was talking about and had a hard time believing that answer. They kept asking questions, including what he thought of the most talked about girl in the 104th Division. One of them asked how John dared to mock his ideal. John replied that she was not his ideal at all. When asked who then is the ideal, John replied Rumi. At first, the boys didn't understand who they were talking about and asked who Rumi was. John explained that this was the most beautiful girl in Don Papa. He couldn't believe that they didn't know who they were talking about. Soon everyone understood who he meant. Upon returning home, the boys had chicken for dinner. The commander himself brought the food. The soldiers did not understand why he was in such a good mood and why he was suddenly so generous. Some have suggested that it was all thanks to John Kim and his outstanding performance on the exam. They noticed that John already had 3 stripes. He was rapidly approaching the rank of sergeant. This was exactly what he had planned. Suddenly, footsteps were heard. Tom Roth entered and announced that the second squad was gathering in the recreation room. The guys were surprised. No one knew what had happened. Tom explained that he was heading to the administration to report on the general dinner of the entire squad, in honor of the fact that one of them scored the highest score on the promotion exam. John immediately realized that they were talking about him. The boys noticed the beer in Tom's hands. He explained that it was a gift to John from the commander. This caused discontent among the others, and mocking shouts were heard behind Tom's back, telling him to choke on it. Night fell. John went out for a walk. He activated his skill, and his summoned creature, a shadow, emerged from the wall. It jumped joyfully and approached him. John asked how she was doing. He remembered how surprised he had been at the first meeting. The creature turned out to be completely different from what he had expected. But later he had an idea. Now he didn't need a killer, he needed a spy. And the shadow was perfect for this role. He instructed her to keep an eye on anyone who might be of interest, especially if it involved magic. If she had the slightest suspicion, she was to report it to him immediately. The creature extended its hand, and John realized that it needed to be fed. He gave a little black magic, and the satisfied shadow ran to carry out the task. John watched her carefully so that no one would notice. He understood that the creature looked more like a wild squirrel, and if someone saw it, panic could start. A voice came from behind him. It was Tom Roth. John immediately thought he was about to get caught. He explained that he simply went out to get some air. He hadn't drunk beer for a long time. Tom asked him if he got drunk quickly. John replied that he didn't get drunk very quickly. He knew that black magicians do not get drunk. Their bodies easily cope with any substances, including alcohol and even poison. Tom congratulated him on his promotion and advised him not to relax. John promised to continue in the same spirit. As they parted, Tom advised them not to stay late since John wasn't getting drunk, but rather to go and help the others finish off the beer. When he left, John breathed a sigh of relief, glad that he hadn't noticed the squirrel, and decided that next time he would have to be more careful. Watching him go, John thought, the longer he knew Tom, the more he seemed like a real soldier, but he had a character. A new day dawned. The superiors discussed John Kim's achievements. One of the officers declared that he considered him an innate genius. The boss admitted that when he heard that only one person had passed the exam, he was ready to reprimand everyone for failing. But this single candidate showed the best result. The combatant agreed with him, noting that during the monster test, John Kim set a record of just 4 seconds. They also mentioned that the training center had spoken highly of him, and now he himself was interested in this soldier. It turned out that John Kim had indeed exceeded all expectations. In addition, it was confirmed that it was Corporal John Kim who was the first to deal with all the middlebacks at the oil depot. The officer pointed out that less than a month had passed since his arrival, and he had already received the rank of corporal. His career growth seemed incredible. The chief suggested that this young man really deserved attention. He added that it was only a matter of time before rumors spread throughout the company, and then John would be noticed not only here. The battalion commander asked again if he meant a special detachment of hunters. The boss confirmed that yes, he did, and noted that his intuition told him that John Kim was a natural hunter. He has seen many fighters in his service, including those who are now considered part of the legendary army of hunters. In his opinion, they are witnessing the birth of a new legend. Meanwhile, at the training ground in the desert, one soldier stood alone. Armed monsters were approaching him from all sides. There were many of them, and they were different. He clutched a spiked club in his hands and watched as they surrounded him. The monsters rushed at him with screams. He wasn't afraid. He just waited for them to get closer, preparing for battle. In the barracks, the soldiers were tired and sleepy. They were preparing for a new day of training. John had just returned from the shower. Everyone had a headache after yesterday's party. His fellow soldiers approached him and asked if he was feeling okay. John assured them that he was fine. The guys were surprised. He drank a lot, but looked cheerful. The phrase that he was a real monster was heard again. Tom Roth entered the room. He asked how everyone was feeling and noted that he felt great. John looked at him with envy. Indeed, a real soldier, excellent physique. Tom asked John if he had gone to the gym. He said no. Tom then reminded him that as a corporal, he now had access to the gym. John promised to look there. Tom also noticed that the simulation machine in the room was pretty good too. He suggested that John try the simulation sometime. He looked at him in surprise. The news about the training simulator interested John. He was already prepared for the upcoming fight. He had heard about this place, the hunter's room. John headed towards the second training room, his eyes shining with joy. He grabbed the door handle and walked inside. Everything around looked quite decent. He began setting up the simulation. Among the list of enemies were a hound, a mouse monster, a goblin, and an orc. John chose the orcs, the most ferocious and aggressive of all available opponents. He considered the number. One was too few. He needed more, 9, and more, until the system gave a message about exceeding the limit. The maximum number is 30 objects. John sighed heavily, hoping to have fun. John then chose his weapon. He was glad to have the opportunity to choose his own equipment. Having chosen his enemies and weapons, he put on his glasses and prepared for battle. The simulation activated. The landscape around John began to change, from an empty training ground to a desert. In his hands was a heavy club studded with spikes. There were monsters all around. They were all angry and rushing straight at him. John thought it was absolutely brilliant. One blow and the first enemy flew away. The blows were strong and precise, the second, the third. The monsters kept coming. He noted that the realism of the simulation is amazing. When all were defeated, he remained standing in the center of the empty arena. The battle was over. It was a shame, John thought, that there were only 30 monsters to choose from. It was all over too quickly. He had a new idea. He chose 30 goblins, 30 orcs, 30 stone golems, and 30 lizardmen. The result was a very impressive army. With the bat over his shoulder, John resumed his fighting stance, his gaze focused, his breathing even. He stood quietly, holding the bat over his shoulder, and watched with a slight grin as the opponents approached one by one. As the monsters surrounded him, he began counting. 3, 2, 1. A fight began. The monsters rushed at him. John swung his bat. He was just glad to see them all. The guy ran towards them, shouting that they were just cuties. He struck blows, crushing, furious. The monsters were torn to pieces with a roar, barely able to withstand John's powerful blows. He smashed them left and right without stopping for a second. It seemed like nothing could stop him. John moved swiftly and without hesitation, crushing one enemy after another. Soon the entire enemy army was defeated. John stood among their bodies, breathing evenly and confidently. John pressed a button on his helmet and the simulation ended. He looked at the helmet and control panel with interest. It was the best thing he had seen in a long time. He came to the conclusion that this thing was the most interesting find after Don Papa. Looking at his skills section, he saw that he had gained a new skill. Basic blunt weapon mastery. This came as a pleasant surprise to him. John realized that skills could be obtained without visiting dungeons. He decided that this was great news. Now he would come to the gym every day and train with different weapons. At that moment, he noticed Sun Jin standing in the hallway, looking at him in surprise, pointing at something with his fingers. John didn't immediately understand what was going on, but soon saw the results of the simulation. Goblins, 30 destroyed. Orcs, 30 destroyed. Stone golems, 30 destroyed. Lizardmen, 30 destroyed. Sun Jin was completely perplexed. Could it really be that John alone did all this? He invited him to come into the training room and talk. Sun Jin didn't understand why. John replied that it would be a useful training and literally pushed him inside. At this time, Sergeant Burns walked down the corridor. He saw the results of the simulation and could not believe his eyes. Before this, Burns was looking for John. He noticed that several fighters were missing and asked where John Kim was. He was told that John said he would be at the gym before work began. Burns instructed him to convey that the commander was looking for him. It turned out that the remaining fighters were making bets. They were arguing about how long it would take for John Kim to become a sergeant. Burns was surprised to see that they were betting every day. The boys laughed, not believing that someone could become a sergeant in 6 months. The sergeant studied the list of bets and as he left, made his own bet. In a month. In the gym, John worked with dumbbells and barbells. He noticed that he had been training for several days, but his results were not improving. After checking the status, he saw the effect of the skill, Another Warrior's Power. The strength indicator increased by 150%. The skill turned out to be very useful and effective in increasing the characteristics. John dreamed of one day obtaining a skill of the level Power of the Returning Hero. He realized that increasing the parameters is not so easy. And suddenly, to his surprise, he noticed the skill's strength was obtained. His strength indicator reached 5,000. He was very happy. Even though it was a basic skill, he knew that he could now grow further and perhaps reach a new level. Meanwhile, John Kim was informed that his commander was looking for him. He thanked her for the information, took his jacket, and went to the office. Upon arrival, he reported his arrival. The commander greeted him warmly and said he just wanted to talk. He asked how serving as a corporal was going a week after his promotion. John replied that he was enjoying it. The commander congratulated him and noted that John had been of great service since the incident with the middle bets. As a token of gratitude, the commander presented him with a certificate of honor for eliminating middle bets and the highest score on the promotion exam. John expressed gratitude for the award. He was informed that the information about literacy was included in his personal achievements, which could affect his further advancement. The commander emphasized that it is not easy to obtain such a certificate, and there have never been such talented hunters before. When John asked if 10 grams would be enough to increase, the commander joked that a certificate of honor is not a coupon for a chicken. A couple of days later, the platoon was lined up. Everyone was ordered to put on their gear and wait for further instructions. They were told that their task today was to clear the dungeon. The commander emphasized that the operation must be carried out without casualties. The platoon was sent to a lair of rat monsters called the Ditch. The corporals prepared themselves, donning their gear and arming themselves. John Kim was among them. Upon arrival, everyone immediately smelled a strong odor. The dungeon was not considered particularly dangerous, but on average there were about 200 rat monsters living there. John suggested luring the monsters outside, and the commander agreed, instructing them to prepare bait. Because of the stench, everyone had to put on gas masks. One of the fighters noticed how stuffy it became inside. The bait was rotten bananas, specially prepared to attract monster rats. When they started throwing out the bait, suddenly a strange noise was heard. The hunters saw many bones around, skulls and remains everywhere. John Kim looked at what was happening in horror. The commander reported that the rats were coming. A swarm of monster rats was approaching the front passage. The order came to prepare for battle and line up. The privates in the third team took the forward position. The deputy commanders took the rear. The commander, trying to defuse the situation, said that whoever caught the most rats would get a bun. John raised his hand, indicating that he wanted to participate too. The pack of rats was approaching. Everyone noticed how huge they were. The order was given not to go forward and to attack from the current position. John Kim held the bat in his hands, fully prepared for battle. The senior fighters took over most of the territory. John noted with respect that their level was clearly achieved through hard work and special training. The commander noted that one more fighter was needed. John continued to watch his colleagues in action and admired their skill. Suddenly, a command was heard. The rats are attacking from the rear. The commander gave the order to the first detachment to take the rear line. The rank and file were ordered to defend themselves, retreat in an orderly manner, and not break formation. The number of rats decreased, but the tension did not subside. One of the fighters noticed that their numbers were decreasing. John felt something strange. Because of the gas mask, he noticed it too late, but he realized it was energy. He wondered, what was it? John Kim watched in horror as cracks began to appear in the ground. He immediately informed the others that the rats were approaching from below. At that moment, the earth parted in all directions. The soldiers watched in horror as a giant monster emerged from underground. His fangs were huge, and it seemed that he was the one who left all these bones. He was the leader of the vulture rat monsters. Everyone was horrified by his size. He had 4 eyes, and compared to him, a person seemed tiny. The monster was approaching Sergeant Burns, who was frozen. Everyone was shouting at him to retreat, but he couldn't move. The monster raised its paw to strike. At that moment, someone struck him with a powerful sword. John ordered everyone to get up and retreat. The monster rat was wounded but was preparing for another attack. There was a madness in her gaze, and a strange energy emanated from her. John Kim realized it was magic again. At that moment, an explosion was heard. John decided to check what was going on despite the warnings of his comrades. The monster opened its mouth, preparing to attack, when another explosion occurred. John rushed towards him. He was afraid that someone might notice his use of dark magic. Under the cover of the shield, he struck. John's fist hit the target, and the monster took damage. He tried to raise his paw to strike back, but immediately lost consciousness. John absorbed his dark energy. There was a lot of it. The status now says, set magic energy has been absorbed. Magic value has been increased by 1%. John was pleased. He intends to use this skill further. After the mission in the dungeon, the fighters rested. They discussed the fight and realized that this was a special monster. Despite everything, they managed to lead the squad out without losses. The report indicated that the monster was alone, and it was defeated. John heard the soldiers discussing how, thanks to him, everyone remained alive. At the moment when they saw the monster, no one could move. He apologized for running out without orders, but his comrade replied that without his quick intervention, they would have been in trouble. John assured that he was not hurt. The commander also asked again if he was okay. John answered in the affirmative, and everyone breathed a sigh of relief. The commander reported that the mission in the dungeon was completed, and everyone needed to prepare for return. Later, the commander called John to prepare a report on the elimination of the monster. John didn't know what to write. He just hit him with his shield and then with his fist. He doubted that anyone would believe it. The commander admitted that he had not seen the moment of impact since his view was blocked, and asked directly whether John had really defeated the monster with a punch. John laughed and said he had no choice. The commander asked about his performance. John replied, strength, 65, dexterity, 60. The commander was shocked. Even lieutenants rarely have more than 40, and here we have an ordinary corporal with such numbers. He realized that John Kim was superior in characteristics to many of the sergeants. The commander noted that with such a level, John Kim could enter a military school for hunters. However, John pointed out that he was registered as a high school dropout and would not have been able to enroll anyway. The commander said that if John Kim wanted to become a leader, he could enroll as an external student. He could be accepted straight away as a sergeant. The commander added that the school offered lectures and other classes. He asked if John would mind if he learned about this opportunity. John replied that he didn't want to study. He was happy with promotion for his achievements. The commander said that the decision was his, he would not insist. But if John changed his mind, he could appeal. Then the commander said that he would finish the report himself and suggested that John return to rest. John headed for the door, but the commander called out to him. He thanked John, saying that he had saved everyone today. If it hadn't been for him, everything could have ended in tragedy. John replied that he was just doing his job. He looked at him with distrust, but John was sure that he was doing it for the magic and achievement points. Later in the hallway, the guys discussed what happened and invited John to undergo training with them. John wondered how they even knew he was training and why they wanted to train with him. The sergeant noted that John Kim had successfully dealt with the rats, and Sun Jin had become more useful. All this was due to training. He also expressed a desire to train. John wondered whether he should agree. Burns, not knowing what to say, thanked him for saving him and apologized for the past. He said he was serious about training because he wanted to become a sergeant for personal reasons. Sun Jin suggested training together, but the decision was up to John. John didn't know whether to agree. Burns added that it was thanks to him that he remained alive. John called out to him. The sergeant turned around in surprise. John said he had a condition. Burns had to pretend to be a pigeon for 24 hours from now on. This condition greatly surprised and angered the sergeant. He was forced to agree. John continued to smile. There was a castle on the mountain. The knight was pushing a cart. The priestess noted that they had done a good job. The man didn't know what to answer. The woman noticed his surprised look and asked again if he wanted to say something. The man asked how long she intended to continue. She replied that she hadn't decided yet. The priestess walked up to the large box, opened it, and looked inside. Inside there was a cage with eyes looking at her. The knight tried to call out to her. She used her powers to open a portal. The priestess said that there was a gift for the one who left her of his own free will. She also noted that no matter what she did, it would not be enough. The soldiers sincerely did not understand why they were assigned to do construction. This place would be used to fight monsters in the future anyway. They didn't understand how this could help them. They thought about this as they stood on the mountain. Suddenly we saw an approaching car. She brought the stone and iron, and other soldiers began to unload it. The work was not easy. Sergeant Burns noted that they called it stone iron among themselves because it was unclear whether it was stone or metal. It is much heavier than it appears and much stronger, which is why it is used for buildings. Burns added that the material was made from special minerals found underground. It was originally called. John didn't realize that the sergeant was addressing him. Burns paused, then explained that he was simply speaking out loud in case anyone was interested. The soldiers continued unloading. The command was given to take a 10-minute break. A sergeant approached the commander and reported that when he went to the division headquarters for materials, he heard news. A dungeon had appeared on the territory of their 14th Division. Presumably, a dungeon of iron cans. The boys were surprised. They asked the deputy commander again, hoping that it was not true and that they would not have to go there again. John thought about it. Burns watched him, immediately realizing that he had some ideas. The iron can dungeon is much larger than the standard one, as are the number of monster types inside. These are dungeons without bosses or dangerous monsters, and are used for training among hunters. The stable environment of such dungeons allows hunters to gain combat experience. Such training takes place at the division level before attacks on other, more dangerous dungeons. Burns noted that this was the very same training in the maneuvers of a hunter with a not very good reputation. John asked who he was talking to. Burns replied that he simply decided to voice it in case someone was interested. The information about the hunter's maneuver training interested John. John knew that this training wasn't a priority for him at the moment. However, the platoon commander pointed out that this was division-level training. providing an opportunity to earn achievement points. John remembered that he was just lacking achievements and qualifications. He knew that incidents were more common on the front lines and was glad to be there. He looked down and noticed his shadow. I tried to hide it with my foot, but it didn't disappear. John felt as if the shadow was asking for help. It was trying to convey a message. John saw what happened. The military received a request for assistance from a group investigating the Yangu Gate, a dungeon discovered on divisional territory. The woman said the area was populated by residents and 2 officers involved in the investigation suddenly lost consciousness. An anomaly was reported, and the dungeon may have required an urgent attack. Control of the area was transferred to the division, and the hunters from Yang temporarily retreated. John decided to take advantage of his day off. He got dressed, checked that he had taken everything, and noticed the photograph. At this point, the commander called out to him, noticing that John was carrying significantly more metal stones at the construction site than the others. The commander assumed that John was trying to finish the job quickly so he could take the day off. The commander also noted that John's current address was in a restricted area and asked where he had been during his last vacation. Upon learning that John had been spending time at a computer club, the commander offered him the chance to stay in an empty apartment that had previously belonged to his parents. He handed John the key, noting that the apartment would be the best option for a vacation. The commander looked at the boy's file. He was a complete orphan. John, having changed his clothes and put on his hood, went into the city. Hearing talk about the dungeon being in a closed school, he noticed that the roads were blocked by the military. Walking around them on the roofs, he discovered the entrance to the dungeon. It was foggy and damp inside the dungeon. John found a dagger fragment indicating a recent battle. He felt the presence of the creature and turned around. Behind him appeared a huge creature with rotten teeth resembling a goblin or kobold. John was surprised by its size and wondered if the research team could resist it. The creature attacked John, but he managed to dodge it. He countered with his fist and foot, noting that the goblin was quite tough. John noticed that he had the ability to decompose and attacked again. However, the goblin did not stop, as if he did not feel the blows. He struck John back, from which he flew back. John looked at the broken knife again and realized that everyone he had met since his return had been at the level of an ant, and this monster was at the level of a beetle. The creature howled and lunged at John. The goblin grabbed him by the head. John, angry about his ruined clothes, kicked him. There was an ominous fire burning in his eyes. After this blow, the goblin was knocked out. John took the dark energy from him. After absorbing a certain level of magic, John's stats increased. Along with this, a new skill was unlocked, Dark Arrow. The skill Night Wanderer was also strengthened, and an additional skill, Basic Fencing, was added. John was glad to see the system window again, which now stated that he was the founder of the Sister Lumi is the best character teaching. His abilities included Decay, Nightwalker, Dark Arrow, Basic Weapon Mastery, and Basic Swordsmanship. The Dark Arrow skill allowed one to absorb demonic energy and fire an invisible arrow at the target. John was especially pleased that his fighting skills had increased significantly in one go. He wondered where the basic fencing came from and came to the conclusion that it might have been a result of the critical hit. He then noticed the broken sword. He believed that the goblin he had fought had already been wounded before this encounter. Nearby, he noticed a glow. It turned out to be a large fragment, similar to an arrowhead or a piece of a blade. The monster was probably wounded by someone from the search party. John felt like he had seen this object before. While he was examining the find, more goblins quietly approached him. He took it as an opportunity to test his new skills. The goblins were clearly annoyed, but John was ready for battle and immediately used one of his new techniques. Destructive black streams of energy erupted from John's hands, and he directed them at the goblins. Most of them were destroyed. One of the goblins remained and looked at him. John smiled, knowing he had won. He walked out of the dungeon with a victorious look. Another task successfully completed. After a busy vacation of troll battling and resting, John returned to the party. The rest of the fighters looked tired, depressed, as if they were preparing for a funeral. The platoon was preparing to practice hunter maneuvers. Each unit had to start from a random point and reach the center of the dungeon. The commander gave instructions on how to prepare for encounters with monsters and various unforeseen situations. While everyone was getting ready for the upcoming mission, John remained calm. Suddenly, black balls, dark balls, began to rapidly approach the squad. The commander gave the order to prepare to fire. John took aim and waited for the command. At the signal, the fire began. The dark balls, despite their thick elastic skin, scattered from the shots. When only 3 monsters remained, the commander ordered to cease fire and prepare for close combat. These creatures could attach themselves and start sucking blood, and then they would be difficult to deal with. The guy understood that getting hit could cost the platoon a platoon rating. John rushed forward. He delivered a powerful kick to one of the monsters, sending it flying into the air. The squad took advantage of the moment and shot Darkball in flight. John dealt with the other two monsters in the same way. After this, the squad received praise and orders to destroy the remaining Darkballs. All targets were successfully eliminated. The platoon was given a 10-minute break. The commander ordered the soldiers to catch their breath, check their personal equipment, and make sure there were no injuries. He commended John's actions by patting him on the shoulder. John was also praised by Sergeant Burns. The remaining fighters sat on the ground discussing the recent training, which, in their opinion, was significantly more intense than the previous ones. They tried to remember what number of battles this was, but they couldn't name the exact number. The conversation recalled a hunter who managed to defeat a monster with one blow of his fist, after which the boss was locked in the gathering point, fearing the destruction of the dungeon. John, watching the conversation, realized who they were talking about. It was a hunter with 2 stars whom he considered quite strong. The group continued on their way. The commander ahead ordered to stop. There was a man in the way. He was sitting on the ground with a sign around his neck that said "Wounded." The fighters' expressions reflected bewilderment. Meanwhile, in the old building, an elderly man sat on a chair, smoking a pipe. He noticed a man approaching, a strong man with a sword. The guest came to sharpen his weapon. After examining the sword, the old man discovered a chip and concluded that the sword had recently been used in a fight with monsters. In the center of the underground gathering, they were discussing the abnormally large number of monsters. Lieutenant Colonel Zhang Chol, a platoon commander with the 104th Division, insisted that there should be no incidents. Colonel Chen Gyun, commander of the 1st Platoon of the same division, added that the commander-in-chief believes that the average fighting strength of the division is gradually declining. The lieutenant colonel noticed that they were under excessive pressure. They were joined by Colonel Li Jun Bong, the commander of the 2nd Platoon. The men greeted him. He inquired where the captain was and received clear hints that he had gone personally to the training site. He was worried that the captain might go specifically to his subordinates. The lieutenant colonel reported that the captain had left, leaving behind the phrase, "There is one soldier whom I want to see with my own eyes." Meanwhile, Captain Ron Smith was among the soldiers with a wounded sign around his neck. The soldiers didn't understand what was happening. The commander at first thought that this was part of an operation to transport the wounded, but soon realized that in front of him was the division captain and one of the chief instructors of the headquarters. The captain, despite his impressive size, showed complete indifference and insisted that he should be treated like an ordinary wounded man. He refused to participate and demanded to be left alone and continue training. Among the soldiers carrying the stretcher was Staff Sergeant John Kim. He noticed that the captain had a difficult character and was seriously playing his role as a wounded man. John watched the man in surprise. He suddenly smiled, realizing that this training was going to be different. The story didn't end there. The squad encountered many different monsters. They also received several boxes of provisions from headquarters. The increased danger made the training even more intense. The commander only sighed heavily. A huge monster appeared on their way. John struck him and wounded him. He was joined by another creature with a long tongue, which it used to try to attack the soldier. John destroyed him with one swing of his sword. His sword skills had increased slightly. He noted that even basic skills greatly enhanced his abilities. John helped his comrade up, after which they continued to destroy the monsters. The captain noted that this maneuver training was one of the most intense in the history of the detachment. One of the monsters approached the captain and he knocked him out with a punch. The commander gave the order to finish off the remaining monsters and prepare for rest. It was necessary to hold out until the end. John agreed with this. The captain watched him and was impressed. Meanwhile, the girls were also undergoing training. They were attacked by dark balls. Abby Bell delivered precise blows, skillfully dealing with enemies. One of the girls noted that Abby dealt with all the monsters on her own. At that moment, a creature with an open mouth approached from behind her. The girl turned around. There was fear in her eyes. She fell. Abby managed to stop the monster and saved her. Abby didn't understand what was happening. It all seemed to her as if she had fallen into an abyss. The fighters were taking a break. The captain noted that the detachment reached its destination without serious losses and praised the commander and his platoon. The commander did not understand why he had received praise, but looking at John, he understood the reason. He tried to give credit to the squad, but the captain insisted that the credit was his own. He also said that he would be watching him until the end of the training session. The soldiers noticed how the captain grabbed the sergeant and decided that the second part of the training was beginning. Their attention was drawn to an underground pit. The commander gave the order to advance and take up positions. The soldiers continued their discussion. One of them mentioned that little is known about the underground pit. According to one theory, it is a phenomenon connected to other dimensions through gates in space. It was believed that this was an endless connection with another space. Another soldier added that there are boundaries in the dungeon where this connection can be unexpectedly interrupted. This is the danger of the underground pit. They also heard that when moving through the pit, you can end up in a random point in another place. The discussion was interrupted by the commander when the soldiers noticed something. John looked ahead in surprise. There was a girl lying on the ground. She turned out to be Abby Bell. She regained consciousness and was given water. The commander reported the discovery over the radio and confirmed that the rest of her squad were okay. The girl was injured. Her leg was injured, which made it impossible to continue training. Taking care of a hunter's health was considered as important as developing his fighting skills. The commander said that he would contact headquarters and a medical team would arrive soon. However, the victim refused to be evacuated. The captain approached the group and asked about their condition. She was surprised by his presence as she did not expect him to take part in the training. The commander explained that the girl had a suspected fracture of her left ankle. This was especially offensive considering that there was very little time left before the end of the maneuvers. The captain asked the girl to identify herself and explain the circumstances of the incident. She reported that she fell off a cliff during a fight with a monster, lost consciousness, and woke up in the same place. The captain asked whether this had happened on the edge of the dungeon or in an underground pit. He was particularly interested in her name since it coincided with the name of Colonel Bell's daughter. Having confirmed this, the girl felt awkward, especially noticing John Kim's gaze. On the captain's orders, John Kim had to carry the girl on his back. He was ordered to follow the rear of the detachment together with the captain. If he was tired, he had to report it. John confidently stated that he could handle it. As he moved, he even accelerated. The sergeant expressed concerns that the special treatment could be linked to the girl's background. However, the captain explained that helping the wounded was part of the regulations and was not subject to discussion. The girl felt awkward and depressed as she watched the squad. She was accompanied by the captain himself. She suggested that John stop if he felt overwhelmed, but he continued on, noting that she was lighter than a metal rock. The girl didn't understand what this comparison had to do with it. John continued to say that she weighed about 50 kilograms. The girl got angry and suggested that they just keep quiet. John silently agreed. She promised that she would definitely repay him for his help later. John replied that he would wait for this, and even better if her father did it. He noted that although it was lighter than the metal stone, 50 kilograms was still not easy to carry. The girl asked him to shut up. The men watched silently what was happening, not understanding what it was. It was deep night. The soldiers continued moving, following the commander. They were tired of fighting monsters and wanted to rest. They didn't understand who changed the difficulty of the workout to hell mode. The commander reported that there were about 2 kilometers left and that they needed to remain vigilant. This information was passed on to those in the rear. Suddenly, someone noticed that air-type monsters were flying from the sky. They were getting closer and closer. The commander didn't know where the black rake came from. They circled in the sky. The captain noted that they had been traveling calmly the entire way, but at the very last moment, luck had turned away. Black rakes are small monsters about the size of a sparrow. Their teeth and claws can tear flesh. Although hunters do not die from this, in the current situation they pose a serious threat. The captain noted that it had gotten dark and he couldn't really see anything. Meanwhile, the soldiers were fighting the attacking monsters. They were everywhere. The commander tried to keep them away from John Kim and the wounded girl. The captain noted that from the point of view of the wounded man and the observer, the current situation could greatly reduce the score. John realized that he was no different from those who left the training and ran away. He realized that the breakdown of the structure could be a major factor in lowering the scores. From all sides he heard, "lowering scores." This did not please him. With the girl on his shoulders, he started running. Approaching the commander, he asked to give him a chance. The commander didn't understand what they were talking about because he had a wound on his back, but John saw only one word: decrease in score. He assured the commander that he could handle it. He looked at him with horror, not understanding what his plan was. John told about his plan. Both the commander and the girl were horrified by what they heard. Abby sighed heavily. The commander didn't know what to answer and told John that if the plan didn't work, he needed to retreat. Abby didn't understand if this plan made sense in this situation. The monsters grew in number. The soldiers watched what was happening. The commander ordered to bring the wounded woman, but John said there was no time. The captain watched what was happening with surprise. John took the weapon and asked the girl to hold on tight. He told the girl that the wounded should not be abandoned. Abby squeezed her eyes shut and John prepared to shoot. Darkness has never been a hindrance for a magician. The guy activated the dark arrow skill. John fired without a moment's hesitation, knowing full well that he could not miss. He managed to wound the monster. Abby couldn't believe her eyes. John understood that now no one would be able to dodge his bullets. He opened fire. The targets were destroyed one after another, without the slightest resistance, as if they were walking towards their own death. The boys watched what was happening in surprise. None of them could understand how John managed to do it. Hold a girl on his shoulders and destroy enemies. John happily announced that he had destroyed all the monsters. The group successfully reached the base. They were told that they were all approved. Everyone was glad to hear this. A medical team rushed to their aid. The commander praised the boys for a job well done. John asked the medical staff where he could get the achievements. The commander praised the guy for always moving forward. Abby finally asked to let her go. She apologized for being a nuisance to the platoon and thanked everyone for their support. The commander reassured the girl, saying that the main thing was that everyone remained alive and completed the training. He assured her that she had not become a burden. On the contrary, she had shown courage. The captain was literally bursting with joy. He was incredibly pleased that the entire platoon had successfully completed the task. Unable to contain his emotions, he rushed to hug everyone in a row, causing surprise among the soldiers. He turned his attention back to John Kim, who he said was the reason they had made it. But suddenly another figure approached them. Colonel Yu Ji-hyun, commander of the 4th Battalion of the 104th Division. John looked at her with interest. The colonel immediately noted that there was a wounded woman among the soldiers. According to her, the girl was lucky because falling into an underground pit could have turned out much more seriously. She cast a stern glance at everyone and immediately asked where the observer was. She wanted to be present at the final training meeting in person. It seemed like she had wanted to say this for a long time and chose this moment. The next morning, John Kim was alone in the dining room. He ate his breakfast slowly, enjoying the silence. The cook, noticing him, offered him more fried chicken, explaining that the rest of the soldiers were still asleep and the food would most likely go unclaimed. John, not used to refusing extra food, happily agreed. The cook, looking at him, remembered the discussion between the commanders at dinner, especially how the battalion commander praised John for his actions. Then it was said about how he dealt with the night black rakes on his own, creatures that are extremely difficult to catch in the dark. He added that the recent hunter training was considered the most intense ever, with over 70% of first and second ranks failing the test. Shocked by these facts, the cook, full of admiration, rushed to John, intending to embrace him. John, continuing to eat, only thought that if he was hugged now, all the soup would end up on his uniform. The management walked down the corridor. The man's face was serious. He looked out the window and noticed that the yard was unusually quiet. They explained to him that all the soldiers had been given time off, so they were all still sleeping. The boss was surprised that no one stayed even for lunch. He noted that the fighters had shown themselves during the training, and added that he had heard that the division captain had personally supervised its implementation. The 1st platoon commander enthusiastically supported the remark, emphasizing that their captain was an outstanding person and did not display arrogance. These words angered the boss. He remembered how a female colonel had given the command at headquarters a dressing down, including the captain. When the commander asked how she could do that to the division captain, the colleague reminded them that they had indeed made a mistake that day. Their delay had prevented them from activating the protective shields in a timely manner. He also admitted that the colonel has a stern appearance and gives the impression of being a formidable person. The conversation turned to John Kim. It was noted that he had once again proven himself a hero, earning praise even from the division captain. The commanders were eagerly awaiting the monthly meeting of the 101st Division. Meanwhile, at the headquarters of the 104th Division, the captain was studying the layout of the dungeon. Opposite him sat a girl with a cup of tea. The captain noted that the cleanup plan had been successfully completed and inquired about Abby Bell's condition. The woman reported that she had no serious injuries. Treatment was almost complete, and she would return to duty tomorrow. The captain compared the girl to her father. At that moment, the phone rang. The number was unidentified. On the other end of the line, a voice asked if he recognized him. The captain realized who it was: General Bell, Abby's father. The general said he had some business to attend to. The captain flared up, wondering what he was allowing himself to do. General Bell suggested a meeting. The captain thought it might have something to do with his daughter's injury and considered it a childish approach to the situation. He noted that it was just a training exercise and he could not be held responsible for accidents. However, the interlocutor insisted. The conversation was interrupted by a girl who suggested that the captain apologize. Despite the outburst of emotion, the captain realized that she was right. He asked for a phone. His own was damaged. He used her phone to contact the general, admit his mistake, apologize, and acknowledged that the situation had gotten out of control. The general replied that he forgave, but demanded the name of the person who carried his daughter on his shoulders. When the captain said this, the general became angry. After all, he was not a medic. The girl interrupted the conversation to avoid escalation. The captain ordered the car to be prepared and ordered all meetings to be canceled for the day. They went to meet General Bell. Meanwhile, John Kim, happy after a hearty lunch, walked down the corridor, humming under his breath. He felt someone's gaze on him and turned around. A shadow was watching him. He hid it so that no one would notice and went outside. After making sure there was no one around, he released the shadow but told it not to show itself again. The shadow was hungry and asked for food. John fed her. Then she showed him a vision. Destruction, monsters, traces of demonic energy. John realized that a new invasion was coming. He returned to the barracks where the boys congratulated him on being recognized as the best soldier in the division. He was informed that, thanks to his services, the platoon had been granted leave. John asked if it could be used tomorrow. Having received permission, he went to the city. The streets were destroyed. He noticed a large gathering of hunters and realized that it was all over. John suspected that the shadow had misinformed him. At that moment, he heard a voice. It was Abby. The girls in her group were surprised who he was. Abby doubted that he was really on vacation, but John showed documents. When she asked him why he had come, he replied that he wanted to help with an emergency. The girl didn't believe it. Suddenly, the gates opened. The hunters were ordered to evacuate. Abby asked John to leave too, but he stayed, asking her for a gun. He said he could buy time for the others to prepare for the next stage. The monsters started to come out. It was a pack of red boars. John used Dark Arrow, but the attack had no effect. He realized that their skin was too thick. Then he used the skill Decomposition. It worked, and blood began to flow out of the monsters. One by one they fell, unable to withstand the force that was brought down upon them. Gathering his energy, John prepared for the next wave. A detachment appeared, rushing to help. The commander reprimanded John for acting without orders. But having made sure that the threat had been eliminated, she ordered a retreat and to transmit the coordinates to the research group. The girls were delighted, discussing how John dealt with the 5 red boars. He looked tired and didn't particularly enjoy the attention. The commander watched this in silence. Night fell. The administration received a call. The platoon commander was asked if he knew John Kim. The commander replied that Corporal John Kim was from their squad and was currently on leave. The commander's face changed when he heard the news. John had single-handedly defeated the Red Bulls and was now engaged in public support. The commander reported that the gates were under control and work was underway to clear nearby damaged houses. She noted that Corporal John Kim volunteered to help, which came as a surprise to her. John overheard their conversation. One of the girls noticed that he had a day off today. The second one replied that he was ready to help even on the weekend. The girls asked him how he dared to fight the Red Bulls armed with only a knife, considering that their attack power was comparable to 10 trucks. John didn't know what to say. The situation was difficult, but he had earned his reputation. Abby Bell walked up to John, startling him unexpectedly. He said he almost hit her in the face and asked her to step aside. Abby glanced at his back and asked if they could talk. It was night outside. The buildings were destroyed. John Kim and Abby Bell were standing near them. John didn't understand what she wanted to talk to him about. Abby didn't know where to start. She remembered the day they ran away and when she saw him off on the bus. The girl said that he swore at her from the window. John didn't understand what she was talking about. Suddenly, he remembered his childishness and explained that he had not scolded, but had only said that he would give her a dressing down if she tried to climb again. The girl exhaled and admitted that she had started it that day. She apologized and asked for forgiveness. John didn't understand why things had to be made so complicated. Abby looked at him without looking away and asked if he accepted the apology. John replied that she had nothing to apologize for and agreed to forget about it. She asked him about the test he took for promotion and noted that it only happened once. John asked if she meant him. The girl replied that there had been only one other person before. John turned to her, wanting to know who it was. The girl said that it was her father. John realized that she meant the division captain. Abby Bell confirmed that her father is the only one who went from soldier to captain. She also wants to become like him, so she joined the soldiers. John realized that her father had been the first to achieve his goal. He remembered that when he was 7 years old, the gates had opened and the hunters had begun their activities. He assumed that the captain had re-enlisted as a private. Abby said no. Her father had been very frail in his youth and had been barred from military service due to poor eyesight and other reasons. His physical strength increased after awakening and he joined the army. Abby noted that he was very happy about this because now he could protect her and her mother. John suddenly wanted to meet him. Abby was glad to hear this and said that if they could meet, her father would be glad too. as he was interested in strong soldiers. At the exclusive hunting school, the commander of the 3rd Battalion was greeting the guests. He asked why they had come. Was it because of John Kim? The division captain asked how he knew this name. Captain Bell said he also had information. A fight broke out between the men. They were furious and knew that if this continued, no one would be able to stop them. The girl intervened and stopped them, saying that 5 minutes had passed and that was enough. The men were still glaring at each other. They stood opposite each other. After the fight, the entire gym was destroyed. The tired division commander sat down on a bench. Captain Bell also sat down. The girl reported that the commander of the 3rd Battalion reported the completion of clearing the gates of the Red Bulls. The division captain praised her. The girl accepted the praise and left, leaving the men alone. Bell asked the captain why he had come and what he wanted to say. The captain replied that he was talking about John Kim. He said that he planned to promote him to sergeant. Abby's father wondered why he came to brag about the guy who saved his daughter. To this, the captain replied that he felt no gratitude. John might not have saved her. Abby's father noticed that John had only recently been promoted to corporal. The division commander clarified that his goal was to make an officer out of him. Captain Bell just chuckled. He noted that it would be too noticeable since the guy had already attracted attention. The division captain explained that this was precisely why he had come, to secure his support. He replied that he could not act according to someone else's will, but would first look and make a decision himself. The men remained sitting on the street. At the same time, John noticed an approaching figure. It was a man he recognized. The man who arrived said that he had finally found it. The bus arrived and the girls began to load in. Through the window, they thanked Hunter John Kim for his help. One of them suggested having dinner together. The other noted that they had done a good job. Abby watched with interest, not knowing what to think of John. He saw the bus off and sighed with relief when he noticed a shadow. John didn't understand why she was here. The shadow extended its hand. John expressed his displeasure, saying that the girls had ruined everything. Shadow sighed, not realizing her guilt, trying to get his attention. He didn't understand what had happened. The shadow was dark. The being with demonic energy did not cross the dimension through the dungeon gate. John followed the shadow, which led him to the place of the energy clots. It turned out to be a man who, upon seeing John, exclaimed, "Found it!" He rushed towards him, shouting, "Mr. Minold!" The guy fell at his feet. John asked why he came because he said that there was no need to look for him. The boy could not forget about his master. John looked at him darkly, remembering their first meeting when the boy was wounded and the creature wanted to kill him. Then John came to the rescue. He didn't understand why the man was there and asked who he was. The guy got scared. John thought he was dying. Suddenly the guy said, "It's you, Mr. Minold." John asked how he knew him. He replied that he was the hope of all black magicians, the real Mr. Minold. John asked if he was a black magician too. He couldn't understand why he was so weak. He asked not to speak of him as a legend of black magicians anymore. John turned around and asked curiously what his name was. The guy replied that he didn't have a name. John couldn't believe it and decided to give him a name, Yun-Su. He scolded the guy for moving into the dimension. Yun-Su said that he was the one who abandoned them, leaving only a note, and their order was on the verge of falling apart. John knew he couldn't tell him anything because fanatics like him would persecute him. He couldn't believe that the guy actually came. Yun-Su said that he was his right hand and was supposed to accompany him. John didn't know how to take his words. He asked why he was so lethargic and filled him with energy. Yun-Su said that he saved him again. John was not interested in listening to this. He asked how he got here. The boy said that this miracle happened thanks to his faith in Mr. Minold. John asked for no details, just short and concise. He said that no one would believe that he could move to a dimension with his skills and asked to tell the truth. Yun-Su said that they were his subjects and only listened to his orders. After he left, he watched the saint. Strange rumors were circulating about her. John asked what the rumors were. He said that strange sounds were heard in the temple every night. He managed to overhear them and he saw the monster. There were rumors that monsters of incredible size were caught there. He noticed that the traces of these monsters did not go beyond the temple. There were no bones, no skin, no piece of meat. Yun-Su was curious as to how they managed to kill so many monsters without leaving a trace. John asked again if this was true. He couldn't believe that this guy just showed up here. John thought for a moment and asked if he knew what it was. Yun-Su looked and said that judging by the pattern, it was a fragment of a sword that was used by the temple guards. John remembered where he had seen this sword. He asked how Yun-Su was able to get here without using the gate and whether he died in the inner space. The guy just laughed, which made John question his sanity. He held the shard in his hand, wondering about the purpose of what was happening. In the castle, the priestess stood on a rock. Minold asked why she had called him to this place. She replied that sometimes you just need to get out and feel the wind. Minold, not knowing how to take her words, noticed that she was saying this to a man who had been sleeping on the street for several days. The girl apologized, explaining that she could not leave the temple. Minold asked why he had been called. She reported that several of her colleagues were seriously injured in the Arcus dungeon. He replied that the cleansing was complete and they would not die. The girl smiled. John remembered and asked if the monsters in this world were related to what was happening in his world. The girl replied that no. She explained that the gates and monsters in Isgard began appearing hundreds of years ago. If there is a connection between her and his homeland, it is suffering from the same phenomenon. She noted that he had seen monsters here that had come through the gate, and that it had taken a lot of time and preparation to summon one of them. John listened attentively. He said that when he finished, she would send him home. The girl agreed. John thought about it. He never trusted this priestess and always investigated these phenomena. It turned out that Isgard had been experiencing difficulties for a long time due to the gate. Spatial movement on the dungeon level is probably very difficult even for a saint. But what now? He didn't know what to do. Why was she using so much energy and sending monsters one after another? Is she really wasting sacred relics? He didn't understand why she was going to so much trouble to catch just him. John thought about it. Yunsu knelt down before him and declared that he would serve him here for the rest of his days. John realized that it would not be easy to get rid of this fanatic. He asked him to address him not as Mr. Minold, but by his name, John Kim. Yunsu thanked him and promised to repay him for the favor he had shown for the rest of his life. John asked if Yunsu was able to use the imitation skill. He answered in the affirmative, noting that he now possessed great strength. John doubted this because he himself hardly transmitted any energy to him. Yunsu admitted that he can only transform into small animals. Pointing to the raven, John asked if he could take on its form. Yunsu immediately followed the order and turned into a bird. John told him to go with the night wanderer. The wanderer showed displeasure and tension arose between him and the raven. John called them to order. The raven made sounds, to which John asked him to speak in human language. Raven stated that, as John's right hand, he would restore order. John asked him to be silent and live in peace with the wanderer. Both exchanged glances and shook hands. John instructed the raven to ask the wanderer what action to take next, emphasizing the importance of safety. They accepted the order and went their separate ways. The raven soared into the sky, and the wanderer disappeared into the shadows. Watching the raven take off, John sighed. It was time to go to bed. Several days passed. Burns looked quite pleased. Those around him did not understand the reason for his joy, assuming that he had gone crazy, especially after he began to imitate a dove. They asked him what happened and what was posted. Burns reported that a list of the platoon's quarterly performance appeared in front of the administration office. The boys were surprised to hear this. They looked at Tom Roth, assuming he was back in first place given his intensity in practice and cleanups. They thought he was a scoring machine. Burns reported that Sergeant Roth had scored 75. The boys sighed, realizing that he was in the lead again. They would have liked to have scored at least 50. Burns reported that Sergeant Tom Roth was not in first place, but in second. The soldiers were surprised, not understanding who could have scored more than 75 points. At that moment, John Kim entered the room and reported his return from vacation. Everyone realized that he was the one who beat Roth. John had 99 points. The platoon commander asked if everyone had had dinner and how John had spent his vacation. John replied that it was fine. Then the commander showed the new chevrons. The soldiers were amazed. John Kim had been promoted again. This was made possible by the official recognition of his achievements in training and work in the dungeon. Some fighters were genuinely happy, others were not. One of them checked the bets and realized that he had lost. The winner was Sergeant Burns. John picked up the betting sheet and Burns watched with obvious concern. The boy wondered how they could have had fun without him and asked Burns if he had won. He didn't know what to answer. John just smiled and said, "Great." He watched his comrades, who stood at attention. Burns said he was willing to share his buns. John noted that he was doing this not for profit, but as a token of gratitude for his efforts, and added that there was no need to share the winnings. He wasn't angry about the bet either. Burns was asked to lift a barbell, but the task was slightly more difficult. He quickly ran out of breath and John took the barbell from him. The others watched in surprise as he lifted it with one hand. John explained that he was training them to become stronger and asked who was next. The soldiers replied that they had already trained and thanked them for their attention, hoping to leave. John sighed and said with a smile that they had no choice. The training was over and the soldiers were exhausted. John said he wanted to ask them for a favor. The soldiers tensed, fearing a new training session. He explained that until they reached the rank of private first class, they were prohibited from attending training, using exercise equipment, or even entering the computer club. Smartphones are only allowed to sergeants and above. The soldiers were shocked by such procedures and considered them unfair. They hoped to find a way around the restrictions. John promised to talk to the sergeants, leaving the rest to their discretion. The soldiers assured him of their support and left. On the way out, he stopped Burns and informed him that he had been transferred to the second squad due to a reshuffle. Burns was surprised and realized that they would now have to train together all the time, which did not make him happy. The explosive snake is a monstrous reptile that lives underground. Unlike ordinary snakes, it is not poisonous, but explodes before dying. To disarm it, you first need to remove the tail that serves as a detonator. Otherwise, a chain reaction is possible. Therefore, before killing such a snake, it is important to first get rid of its tail, which serves as a detonator. Otherwise, a chain reaction of explosions may occur. The commander explained this in practice to his soldiers. Their next task was to destroy these snakes. He said that for this reason, the best option for clearing an area of explosive snakes is a small squad of experienced hunters. John knew that he had already caught many such snakes in the game, so this task did not seem difficult to him. He believed that he alone was enough to complete this mission. The commander ordered a halt. The soldiers were resting, taking advantage of the brief lull before the next mission. Suddenly, the commander noticed something. Meanwhile, John was testing his skills. He discovered that he had unlocked the skill Agility Leap, which increased his agility by 5 points. John thought it would be nice to get some kind of class skill, but this one was pretty good. Suddenly, he heard someone's voice calling out to him, "Mr. John Kim!" John asked what happened. He was informed that a huge amount of demonic energy had been detected. John was surprised. He immediately sharpened his attention and asked again where this energy was. The raven looked up at the sky and said, "In Incheon." A couple of days passed. The city of Incheon. The guy was watching the house. The raven was next to him. He asked him what the situation was. Raven replied that he had done nothing, only observed as he was asked. He had not sensed any monsters, so perhaps the energy was coming from the dungeon. John asked how many people were there. Raven replied that there was no one there yesterday, but now there was one person in the house. He added that it would be nice if John came yesterday. John said that it was not so easy for soldiers to get away. He barely managed to get an overnight leave. Raven didn't know what to say to that. John knew that at first glance it might seem like he was trespassing. He covered his face and justified himself by saying that he was going to remove a dangerous object from a civilian's home. The raven agreed with him and they set off on their journey. The guy sneaked into the house. He looked around. John saw an object standing on the nightstand. He realized that it was this object that was emitting this energy. The crystal was emitting pure dark energy. John looked at the crystal and understood that it was not harmful to the body. He wanted to touch it. According to his observation, this crystal seemed to have been processed. But suddenly he heard the command, "Stay still!" There was a man standing behind him. He was spotted. The girl prepared to fight the thief. Night fell. Abibel couldn't sleep, so she decided to look at her phone. Her mother wrote to her, asking if she was bored spending the weekend alone. Abby wrote that everything was fine and she would come to see them tomorrow. Suddenly the girl heard some noise. She quietly looked out the door, went down the stairs and saw a man. Abby thought it was a thief. Now, standing in front of the thief, she asked who he was and why he had broken in. The girl was determined. John recognized her. The girl standing in front of him was Abby Bell. He couldn't understand why it was her again. A thought flashed through his mind. Why was the house that contained the item with demonic energy her house? How was that possible? Raven couldn't find what to answer. In his defense, he said that he didn't know it was Abby Bell's house. He pointed to the shadow and noted that it was she who saw him first. John thought it made sense. This was General Bell's house, so it was entirely possible for something like this to be here. But he didn't understand why Abby Bell was home today. He remembered that their relationship was already strained. Why her, of all people? Abby ordered him to put his hands up and not move. John didn't know what to do now because he had already climbed in here and couldn't just leave. The enraged girl repeated the order and struck. He dodged. He had a pen and a piece of paper in his hands. While she was striking, he was trying to write something. John must have noticed that she moved quite well. He thought that at this rate she wouldn't be far from being a sergeant. He grabbed her hand because he knew he was stronger. Abby couldn't understand how this was possible. They stood opposite each other. He held her hand tightly, not allowing her to move. The girl was angry. She felt like he was making fun of her. She realized that this guy who broke into her house was clearly unusual, and somewhere she had already seen these movements. She struck again. John dodged. He kept his eyes on the magic crystal. Abby stood right in front of him, blocking the exit. He quickly grabbed the crystal and in a matter of seconds jumped out onto the balcony. The surprised girl looked at him. She shouted at him to stop, but he jumped over the balcony and disappeared. Abby didn't understand why he didn't touch her. There was a piece of paper in her palm. She didn't understand how she got there. She opened it, and there was one word written on it, B. This made the girl furious. As John ran away, he heard her yelling after him that he was a complete asshole. John looked at the crystals. He noticed with curiosity that this crystal had much more energy than ordinary monsters. And since he was in the general's house, it meant that the crystal had no effect on the human body. Raven noticed that it might be a monster crystal. John said he knew about it, but the question was how could the monster's crystal contain so much energy? He had never seen a crystal like this even in Isgard. Monster crystal is a mineral that is sometimes found in monsters. Its size depends on the age and danger of the monster. Usually, the amount of mana in it is proportional to the size of the crystal itself. John realized that this is one of the most valuable items that can be obtained from hunting monsters. He broke it and touched the stone. He had never heard of a crystal containing demonic energy. He absorbed this energy with his hand. There was a lot of it. His numbers had increased. John knew he didn't want to get involved with the damn saint, so there was no time to think. A new skill was created. Demonic Energy Singularity, new skill, Demonic Energy Capture. John was surprised to receive 2 skills at once. He looked through his information and noticed that the number of skills was gradually increasing. A new skill caught his attention. Demonic Energy Singularity. This skill removed the color and smell of magic so that it did not affect the surrounding environment. The skill could be turned on and off at any time. John realized that the more the demonic energy level increased, the thicker it became and the harder it was to control. But this skill was necessary. Now his energy would not stick to anyone. He decided to test the skill Capture Demonic Energy. Shadow and Crow were terrified. John reached out and grabbed the raven with a grip. He saw what it looked like in practice. He wondered if there was a weight limit and remembered that he used to be able to carry an ogre, not just a raven. He sent the ravens back and told them they had a task. John said that along with information on the topic of demonic energy, they should look for items from the dungeons that contain it. They accepted his order. John needed to reward them and feed them a little. The shadow and the raven behind him fought for magical energy. As soon as he turned around, they pretended that everything was fine. John asked Yunsu if he had ever tried Korean food. They ordered a lot of food. Yunsu sat and cried with a spoon in his hands. John didn't understand what was happening. Yunsu said he was crying because the food was too delicious. Angry, John told him to make up his mind, either eat or cry. In Isgard, he had only ever eaten strange dry biscuits, so John could understand his feelings. Suddenly, the phone in his pocket rang. John looked at it. There were many messages about assignments for partisan training. The instructor said that training with a special area for awakened ones is called guerrilla training for hunters. The boys were doing exercises. John Kim was very happy and pleased. Further ahead of them was route number 3, the rope bridge. He happily rushed forward and carried out any tasks. Guerrilla training for hunters was not much different from other training and had already earned a bad reputation. The boys were tired. They sat and ate porridge. They decided that they were being punished because the division commander did not like them. They did not understand what they had done wrong. One of them remarked that he had never seen the commander and did not understand what he had done wrong. The disadvantage of this training was that they had to leave the dormitory and sleep in tents in the open. One comrade noticed that his friend was not eating. He asked why he was not eating. He replied that if he ate a lot, he would have to go outside to the toilet. The captain, commander of the 2nd Company of the 2nd Battalion of the 104th Division, arrived. Tom Roth reported that they were now having personal time. The man said that they had done a good job in training, and that tonight all the instructors would be deployed on night duty and raids, so they would be able to get a good rest. They were told to defeat everyone in the trench battle tomorrow. It was all about trench combat. Its rules were simple. The field was marked with a square. Participants had to push everyone except their team members out of this square or not lose to the opponent. They will have to put in a lot of effort. This fight will be no joke. The instructor announced the winner in the 3rd match of the 1/8 finals. To some, this may seem like a simple confrontation in which punches and the use of weapons are prohibited. But the trench battle during the partisan training of hunters for 4 battalions of the 104th Division has a special significance. The events will be observed by the authorities. The boss noticed that this guy from the winning team, Kurt Brown, was not an ordinary guy. Last year, their team also won thanks to him. The commander of the 1st Battalion of the 104th Division noted that he was a corporal then, but now he's a sergeant. The men noticed that they had been up against many troops that morning, and he had taken out 9 of them single-handedly. They thought about his characteristics. The lieutenant colonel noticed that this sergeant had recently passed the promotion test, but the commander was delaying his promotion. The colonel did not understand why. He asked if this was because his promotion meant he would not be able to participate in trench warfare. The instructor announced that the 4th Battalion, 4th Company, 4th Platoon, 4th Detachment would go next. However, there was only one detachment of the 4th Battalion that passed the preliminary selection. For battalions that show poor results, the number of training sessions will increase many times over. The winners just watched the girls. Kurt Brown spotted John Kim. He knew John was from the 2nd Battalion. John looked at him in surprise. He felt that the guy was unhappy with him. The guy said that there was a famous person present, a hunter who rose to the rank of sergeant. John thanked him for such a flattering review. The guy just looked at John skeptically and noted that there were so many expectations, but in the end, he was just a fool. John's colleagues were angry and ready to fight, but the guy was so huge that he stopped them both. They didn't understand where Kurt Brown got such strength from, they couldn't even move. Kurt noted that it would be enough to simply apologize to him. The guys were angry, not understanding how such people even existed. They asked John how he put up with it. He replied that everything was fine. Burns did not agree and wanted to go straight away and punish the guy. He was already ready for a fight. Sergeant Kim noted that everything was fine since they would meet anyway. Meanwhile, the girls were preparing for the fight, although they did not understand why they were doing it. The corporal noted that it was hard and touching each other was terrible. The second girl said that they definitely need to choose a raid king. Her friend replied that they were the only ones who passed the selection. The battalion commander must be very angry. In fact, the commander was in a bad mood. The girls didn't know what to do because she was really furious. The instructor announced that the 4th Detachment of the 4th Platoon of the 4th Company of the 4th Battalion would go next. The girls stood up. They decided to just win and become raid queens. The squad leader led them forward. With a cry, the girls rushed into battle. They fought against large men who were stronger than them, but they still managed to overcome them. They weren't going to give up so easily. The guys got it in full. The girls managed to push the men out of the field. The squad leader was very proud of herself. She noticed one of the soldiers trying to catch up with a girl from her squad, and he almost succeeded. The guy was in anticipation. He almost caught her, but the girl suddenly grabbed his hand and threw him to the ground. The commander was pleased with her. The girl stood with a victorious look. Suddenly, the corporal saw another girl fighting with the man, trying to overcome him by force. The man was not going to give up. Another one approached them, but before he could even get close, he was immediately knocked out. Abby dealt with him. The girl thanked Abby for her help. The battle continued. The boys watched the girls. The leader of the boys noticed that his team had a hard time pushing even one of the girls. He wasn't exactly surprised, but he still expected better from them. They intended to show the younger boys some class. 2 fighters went against the girls, knowing that their commander was very strong. The guys decided to prove that this year everything would be different. But the girl grabbed them both. They didn't understand how she alone had so much power. Her power was simply enormous. The girls rushed to help their commander. Together they defeated the guys and they left the ring. The girls looked at their rivals victoriously. The instructor announced that the 4th Detachment of the 4th Platoon, 4th Company, 4th Battalion had won the 1/8 finals. The girls were happy with their victory. John Kim watched them. He understood that the girls' team was well built and quite strong. The other guys also noticed that the girls' team was quite talented. Burns noted that they would face Kurt Brown in the quarterfinals. He hoped that Kurt would lose. However, his friends had other ideas. Kurt had to reach the finals and meet them. They intended to teach him a lesson. The boys knew that as long as they had Sergeant Tom Roth and Sergeant John Kim, they couldn't lose even if they wanted to. The girls glanced at them. One of them particularly noted John Kim. She recognized him. It was the hunter John Kim who had helped them. The guys didn't understand why the girl was acting so happy. The boys couldn't understand who she was greeting. The happy girl waved her hands at them. The boys decided that they would now root for the 4th Battalion. John genuinely thought they were idiots. Meanwhile, the command discussed what was happening. One of the men noted that he was rooting for the boys. The second one said it was a perfect game. They asked the 4th Battalion commander if she was happy with her team. The instructor announced that the 5th game of the 1/8 finals was beginning. The 2nd squad of the 2nd Platoon, the 2nd Company, the 2nd Battalion should get ready. The 4th squad of the 1st Platoon, the 3rd Company, the 1st Battalion will also enter the field. The woman turned her gaze to one of the guys. She had already seen him and knew that this guy's name was John Kim. The comrades approached John and asked if he had heard that if you get first place, you can get fired. John asked them in response, "What if he doesn't want to go out with them?" to which the guys noted that then they don't need first place. John gave them an angry look. He got ready. It was time to begin. The teams stood against each other. The instructor gave the command to get ready and start on the whistle. The boys rushed at each other. John continued to stand and watch. Sergeant Roth captured two. Burns also rushed to the boys' aid. The boys were pushing each other. For Burns, it was a lot of fun and seemed easy, but then a bigger enemy appeared. The guys noticed him. John glanced at him with interest and, having assessed the situation, decided to take on this opponent himself. He wanted to test his new skill, capturing demonic energy. He literally pulled the guy towards him and grabbed him. He didn't understand what was happening. John was happy to realize that his skill was enough to unbalance this big guy. Capturing demonic energy is a skill that other people don't see. The guys looked at John with curiosity. They couldn't understand how he did it. The enemy rushed at John again, but he used his skill again. The guy fell to the ground, not understanding what was happening. John realized that if he noticed anything, it would be bad, and decided that it was enough to have fun. He rushed at his opponent. He failed to catch John. John walked around behind him and grabbed him, throwing him far away. He saw him fly away and said to him, "Bye," as a farewell. As expected, their team easily made it to the final. But unfortunately, the final meeting with the 4th Detachment of the 4th Division did not take place. The final competition began and the teams were called to the court. Kurt Brown and his team were also there. The guys discussed Kurt, saying they had heard he wrestled before high school and noticed that he still had wrestling skills from his competitions. He was also said to have competed in national competitions. The guys were angry and ready to pounce on this guy, but Tom Roth stopped them. John understood why they were so angry. And it wasn't that Kurt Brown's team won the selection, but how they did it. The girls lost with a perfect score of 6-0, and in that match there was no one who went off the court. All opponents were defeated on it. Kurt Brown took care of the girls with ease, and it looked like he was just warming up. John thought about it and realized that, given the fact that there was no fighting here, it wasn't the big guy's fault, but the one who was weak and couldn't fight back properly. Burns said it was time to teach this bastard some basic etiquette. John noticed that he still had a long way to go. If his team is so angry at this big guy, then they should grind him into dust. The teams were ready. Kurt Brown stood victorious and the boys were provoked again, but Tom Roth had the situation under control. The big guy turned his attention to John and said that he was curious about the face he would make when he smashed his girlfriend. But John didn't show any emotion and didn't understand what he was talking about. The man pointed to the girl from the 4th Battalion, thinking that she was his girlfriend, because she was waving happily and sincerely, supporting John. Burns said she was not waving at John Kim and she was not his girlfriend. The guys noticed that John Kim doesn't have feelings for anyone except Rumi from the game Dungeon Masters. To which the big guy just laughed loudly, grinning at how someone could like a girl from a flawed game. The big guy continued to laugh, calling John Kim pathetic. The instructor ordered the teams to get ready and start on the whistle. The big guy said that it would be easier with John Kim, since he needed to be returned to Rumi in one piece. The whistle blew. Kurt Brown got ready, still amused by his little sister Rumi. John's team rushed forward, but John continued to stand, his face expressionless. The big guy rushed at him, thinking that he still hadn't come to his senses. His fingers were ready to grab John. He was already close. But John activated his skill and continued to stand. The boys watched what was happening in horror. The management was delighted with this fight, and other teams were also watching. The instructor didn't know what to do. The boys didn't understand what had happened. Kurt Brown held his head and said he just tripped. He needs to try again. John looked at the instructor, and the instructor looked at the command. In the end, the instructor gave the go-ahead to try again, warning the boys to be careful and not to create unnecessary conflicts. He repeated that hitting was prohibited. Kurt Brown realized that John was up to something and threatened to make him suffer. John didn't understand what he was talking about or what exactly he could do. The instructor gave the command to continue the competition. John noted that he hadn't even started. The big guy didn't understand what he was talking about, but he understood that John was up to something. Kurt began to suspect that he had decided to run away and not engage in battle. Using his strength, John rushed at those around him, striking one after another. The big guy was confused, not understanding why John was destroying even his own team members. The guys flew in different directions and received blows, and John continued the competition. Tom Roth stood in front of him. Tom noticed that John was going head over heels. John pushed Tom. The big guy simply didn't understand what kind of crazy situation was happening. John sent Tom off the field. The big guy couldn't understand what the hell was going on. John Kim was full of demonic energy. Steam was coming off of him. His eyes were glowing ominously, and a satanic smile was playing on his face. The command ordered to stop the competition. The commander replied that John Kim was not breaking the rules and asked on what grounds the competition should be stopped. The men continued to complain that it was not normal to push their team members off the field. They didn't understand what was happening to the guy, and was it really possible to turn a blind eye to it any longer? The other men noted that if anyone got hurt, it would be on their conscience. The commander of the girls' battalion replied that the judge was responsible for this. She remembered how Kurt Brown had dealt with her girls, and she wanted him to get what he deserved. Meanwhile, John Kim and Kurt Brown clashed. The big guy knew something was wrong with John. He positioned his men to be alone with him. Kurt admitted that his opponent was strong, but in his opinion, the main thing was technique. He didn't understand what happened when John grabbed him with his hands and lifted him up. He threw it to the ground with all his might. John ordered the man to get up. He rose to his knees, realizing that his technique had not worked. John's eyes were gleaming ominously, and he was smiling. He looked dangerous. John rushed at the big guy, and he began to shout that he understood everything and surrendered. John threw him again, and the big guy flew to the floor. He wanted to run away, but John caught him and asked who gave him permission to get up. Once again, John pounced on him. The guy begged him to stop, saying he was giving up and leaving. But John was angry. He was very angry at the big guy's jokes about Rumi's little sister. He left the guy saying that Rumi's sister is not just a picture. The boys watched what was happening in amazement. The girls did not take their admiring glances away. Abby Bell was surprised. The big guy was lying on the floor, foam coming out of his mouth. John looked at him and said that Rumi was his favorite character. The big guy tried to ask why. At this point, the instructor blew his whistle and announced that the competition was over and that the second squad of the second platoon of the second company of the second battalion had won. John heard the whistle and noticed the boys throwing angry looks at him. He tried to justify himself by saying that he was a little nervous. Burns praised him. The guys continued to discuss the past match, admitting that there had not been such a spectacular fight in a generation. They were especially surprised that John Kim didn't even break a sweat. They were genuinely happy that he was left alone and still won. Some believed that if John had immediately announced his intention to fight alone, the others would have simply left the ring. The sergeant said that no matter how the circumstances developed, the murder of a fellow soldier could not be justified. Tom Roth was left disappointed by what happened. He silently left the site, taking his dark thoughts with him. A determination was already forming in his mind not to lose to John Kim next time. Later at the formation, the results were announced. The victory medal was presented to John Kim to thunderous applause from his fellow soldiers. After the award ceremony, Burns took his gun and left the tent. He didn't understand why they were doing guerrilla training. Suddenly, he heard someone calling him. It was Abby Bell. The girl had business with him. Sometime later, Burns received a message inviting their squad to spend the weekend they had won. A joint walk was planned, and it was only necessary to decide on a meeting place. At the same time, the correspondent asked for John Kim's number. Burns didn't know what to do. On the one hand, he didn't want to get into trouble. On the other hand, refusing would look suspicious. After all, everyone knew that he served in the same unit as John. While Burns was hesitating, his comrades had already headed for the exit. He called out to them, but they did not turn around. Left alone, he noted that he simply wanted to unwind a little in the company of the sergeant's girls. Meanwhile, John Kim returned to his room and decided to check the results of his recent guerrilla training. His skills had improved noticeably. He noted to himself that after passing the 60 stat mark, his progress had slowed down, but even 1,000 dexterity points was a great result. John felt that his body had become stronger and was pleased with it. Suddenly, he heard a voice. Someone asked him for permission to eat, despite the fact that John had already given the creature money earlier. The creature's behavior irritated him. However, he became wary when he reported the discovery of an unknown energy. The energy felt strange and powerful, making John both curious and uneasy. But before continuing, the creature was interrupted as food was brought to it. John opened his phone and saw a message from Abby Bell. He didn't know where she got his number from or why she wrote to him. Doubting the appropriateness of such communication, he decided to block her. At that moment, Burns burst in on him. He quickly tried to stop John, realizing that he was about to take drastic measures. Burns tried to justify himself by saying that such a chance does not come along often, and hinted at the importance of the mental climate in the team. John began to understand that it was Burns who had given Abby's number. The conversation irritated John more and more. He demanded an explanation, but Burns hesitated, not knowing how to formulate the answer. Finally, John guessed the essence of what had happened. Everything pointed to Burns acting behind his back. John had already thought of what to do to teach him a lesson. A week passed. On the appointed Sunday, the detachment arrived in the city. The detachment was in high spirits. Burns noted that he had already suffered enough for this opportunity. John believed that this was the merit of the youngest and that they should thank him. The boys noted that even Sergeant Tom Roth agreed to go on the trip so easily. Tom, in turn, noted that it was better to go out into the fresh air than to spend the day locked up with a noisy company. The boys watched the group of girls from the 4th Battalion with interest. They were particularly interested in the unfamiliar man standing next to Abby Bell. It turned out that it was her father, the commander of the 7th Battalion. His figure and serious look immediately attracted attention, especially after Sergeant Tom Roth recognized him and saluted. Abby, holding her father's hand, tried to convince him to leave, but he insisted on meeting those with whom his daughter served. He looked closely at the fighters' faces, stopping his gaze on John Kim. The group headed towards the rides. Tom and the commander of the girls' squad were left behind. The girl shared that she doesn't like such places. Following the others, they discussed their sporting achievements. After the rides, they ate cotton candy. Then they measured their strength, trying to find out who was stronger. The boys made fun of Burns, who was upset when he received a tomato as a prize. The girls, in turn, drew attention to one of the fighters with excellent shooting, but he also received the same prize. John became interested in the strange bullets used at the shooting range and noticed the awards. Among them was a limited edition keychain with an image of the character Rumi, released for the anniversary. Having seen this rarity, he was determined to get it. Taking up the rifle, John hit the targets with amazing accuracy. Despite the fact that he only fired 9 shots, his result allowed him to take second place and receive the coveted keychain. He was genuinely happy, although those around him did not understand what exactly he was so happy about. John proudly admired his trophy, believing that the trip to the city was definitely a success. Later, Abby Bell called out to him. She was clearly interested in the conversation that had taken place earlier between John and her father. John remembered that moment by the car. The commander of the 7th Battalion apologized for distracting him on his day off. The guy replied that everything was fine. Abby's father assessed John carefully, placing his hand on his shoulder. The strength of his grip spoke of a stern character. He acknowledged John's steadfastness and, as a token of gratitude for saving his daughter, presented him with a rare item from the dungeon, usually reserved for generals. This artifact increased a random amount of stats and was considered extremely valuable. The commander insisted that John use it wisely, continue training, and not tell anyone where he got the gift from. In conclusion, he warned that he would not tolerate any attacks on his daughter. John watched the car go, putting the artifact in his pocket and feeling a new wave of motivation boiling inside him. The guy told Abby that the conversation was trivial. The captain simply offered to treat him when they met. John said that the father was obviously just worried about his daughter and perhaps decided to repay the debt for saving her. John remembered carrying Abby through the desert and now understood why his father had decided to hand him a business card offering to help in Daejeon. Abby, albeit embarrassed, apologized for the unexpected meeting. John promised to choose something expensive from the menu. Meanwhile, the company continued to enjoy their vacation. Burns noted that the girls had not invited them by chance. The girls wanted to thank them for their previous help in the battle, where their unit suffered losses. Especially John Kim. They offered to pay for lunch. The boys were disappointed to realize that they had only been invited so that the girls could meet John. While the kids were having fun, a new dungeon opened in Daejeon. A raven was watching him and immediately went to report to his owner. A bait was discovered in the dungeon, a massive magical stone causing surprise among the command. It's time to say goodbye. The girls said they had fun. Abby promised to treat John Kim to dinner next time. The raven informed John that there was something unusual about the marked dungeon. In his observations, everyone became too lively. The next day, John arrived in Daejeon by bus. He noticed that there was chaos all around. Many soldiers were transporting stones on carts. The guy wondered whether they would let him see the dungeon. Suddenly, he noticed a dove. It was Yunsu in a new guise. Yunsu reported that he had been watching the dungeon without closing his eyes. He noted that there were 100 kilograms of magic stones in the dungeon. John compared it to the dungeons in Isgard. He understood that there was incredible energy hidden there. Yunsu noted that he did not sense any monsters inside, but the energy was still very aggressive. John remembered that he had only seen such energy once before. He knew what was going on. He knew he had to intervene quickly before it was too late. The military continued to export magical stones. Suddenly, something started happening from the dungeon. The commander ordered his subordinates to throw stones and run away from there. He was informed that there were still soldiers left inside. John hurried as best he could. He knew that this energy could only mean one thing: a fake dungeon. One of the soldiers tried to stop him. John gave his name and position. He also informed the soldier that he would open the dungeon from the inside. He didn't understand what the words "from within again" meant. Ignoring the others, John rushed into the dungeon. The dungeon swallowed him and closed. The soldiers had never seen anything like this before. John successfully entered the dungeon. There he found frightened soldiers. He asked the guys if there was anyone else here besides them. The guy replied that there was no one else here except them and asked the newcomer who he was. John replied that he was just passing by. He asked if there were any casualties. The soldiers were ordered to check the equipment and condition of each one. They had few weapons and even less food. John didn't understand how it was possible to go into the dungeon with such supplies of provisions. He didn't understand why they were sending just a transport team. John explained to the boys that they were now in a fake dungeon. He compared the dungeon to a large monster that lures people in and swallows them. This time the bait was magic stones. John took command, assuring the squad that he could handle the situation. He ordered them to follow him, moving towards the center of the dungeon, destroying all monsters along the way. When monsters began to form from the mud, the fighters did not understand what they were dealing with. John, without a second's hesitation, rushed at the enemies. He ordered the soldiers to stay behind. His name has long been known in the hunting community. It was rumored that in the entire history of hunters, John Kim became a sergeant faster than anyone else. His power and technique were astounding. John was nicknamed the Invincible Monster of the Hunter Army. The authorities arrived to assess the situation near the dungeon. It was Captain Bell. He was very angry and unhappy with what was happening. Captain Bell was puzzled as to why soldiers without a strategic command were in the dungeon. The dungeon was explored for only 2 weeks and no one reported it to the captain. He was ready to tear his subordinate to pieces. Regardless of how it all ends, for such a blunder the commander will be fired. Captain Bell threatened that if there was even one wounded, he would put him behind bars. John successfully cleared the way for them. He insistently asked the soldiers not to push forward. John warned that the closer they got to the center of the dungeon, the more monsters there would be on their way. The fighter's task is to conserve their strength. They prepared for battle. John wasn't worried about the boys at all. It was just that experience points were gained faster here. He was determined to take them all for himself. John pointed out that they needed to move on. The team followed him. More monsters stood in their way. They guarded the ball in the middle of the dungeon. John knew he couldn't send the boys out to fight. When they entered the dungeon, their strength had dropped. He explained to the soldiers that they needed to break the ball to get out of the dungeon. John gave the boys instructions to protect the rear and promised to deal with it quickly. The soldiers accepted the order. The monsters rushed to attack. John rushed to meet them. He understood that the guys could see him, so he would have to give up using his powers. John struck the monsters with lightning speed. His movements were precise and swift, each blow coming unexpectedly and hitting the target with astonishing accuracy. He destroyed them one by one. Both his hands were akin to deadly weapons. For the sake of experience, John was ready to do anything. There were a couple of monsters left near the ball. John noticed the ball and sensed something was wrong. He realized it was poison. John Kim gave the order for the boys to retreat back. The soldiers couldn't understand what was happening. Huge clouds of purple smoke were moving towards them. John was immune to poisons, unlike the boys. He knew that depending on the strength of the poison, the boys might not last long before they got out. John saw that the hidden powers of the item he had were unlocked. It was the item that Abby Bell's father had given him. He realized that the object was very useful at that moment. It could be used to temporarily acquire a skill. John just had the skill he needed. He summoned a huge magic sword for himself. John will never forget the skill of the Dark Knight. To acquire it, he had to go through hell. The guy swung. With one blow of the sword, a huge number of monsters were destroyed. The ball also couldn't withstand it and collapsed. John absorbed his dark energy. Yunsu relayed the message that the military was attaching something to the entrance of the dungeon. Captain Bell was planting a magic bomb. John asked Yunsu not to worry. He was already on his way. Commander Bell faced a difficult task. Earlier, he was informed that John Kim from the 104th Division was in the dungeon. At first, he was angered by this news. He did not understand what the guy was doing in a dungeon that did not belong to his division. He was told that the guy rushed there immediately after the gate began to behave strangely. The chief was also informed that the commander of the battalion to which John Kim belongs is already on his way. Captain Bell wanted to trust John Kim, but he knew his chances were slim. The men had been without proper equipment for 4 hours. He understood that he couldn't delay any longer. Suddenly, they noticed that something was happening to the entrance. The captain gave the order for the medics to prepare to help the survivors. He rushed towards the gate, trying to keep the exit from closing. The medics arrived as ordered and awaited further instructions. They noticed some vague figures slowly emerging in the dungeon passage. One after another, soldiers began to emerge from the dark maw of the dungeon. Captain Bell breathed a sigh of relief and was genuinely pleased to see them safe and sound. a warm smile flickering in his eyes that he rarely allowed himself even in the best of times. He asked the boys if they were okay. The soldiers assured him with a slight smile that they were all right, trying to dispel his worries and show that despite the fatigue and danger, they had coped. They joyfully announced that the dungeon had been captured. The last to emerge from the dungeon were John Kim, supporting a wounded soldier under the shoulder. John handed over his wounded comrade to the medics. He noticed Captain Bell standing nearby, staring at him with a look that was filled with anxiety, relief, and genuine gratitude. The captain silently straightened up and saluted him with dignity, expressing with this gesture not only respect, but also recognition of his bravery and merit. At headquarters, Division Commander Bell studied the report. He asked John how he got into the dungeon. John replied that he was looking for the captain to have lunch with. The guy's answer made him doubt. The whole situation seemed absurd to him. John insisted that as soon as he saw the gate, his body rushed inside on its own. The captain just laughed in response. The guy seemed a bit odd to him. He noted that John had made a huge contribution by completing the dungeon without a scratch, and decided that he should be thanked. The captain informed the boy that his promotion had already aroused interest at the hunter's headquarters. John thought this was good news. Commander Bell warned that if this led to trouble, he would personally take responsibility along with the commander of the 104th Division and help the boy. John thanked him for this. At parting, the commander suggested that John ask him a personal question. It was his gratitude for saving the soldiers' lives. John wanted to know about a promotion, but the commander noted that he could not influence it. His attention was drawn to a small object on the table, a stone with magical energy. The captain asked the boy if he knew what it was. John replied that no, he just had a sudden urge to collect them. The captain said that a similar stone had recently been stolen from him. He assured John that the stone was safe for the body. Captain Bell handed it to John, adding that it reminded him of his daughter, just in case he inquired about the nature of their relationship. John replied that they were just comrades in service. The captain liked this answer. John said goodbye and left his office. Later, in the silence of the night, John Kim clutched the stone he had received in his hand. Meanwhile, Yun-Su was praising the local food. John asked him to eat in silence. John absorbed the energy of the stone. He was surprised to see that his stat points had not increased. Perhaps he had reached a time limit. But at the same time, a new level of demonic energy opened up and a new skill was activated: Demonic Whip. Meanwhile, the latest events were discussed at the Hunter's Central Headquarters. Lieutenant General Kim Chong-mo said that an inspection team will soon arrive at the 107th Division. The division commander noted that it was good that everything ended well for everyone. The captains listened to him in silence. It was decided that the next day information about what had happened should be transmitted to headquarters. The order was accepted without objection. At this time, another high-ranking man joined them. He joked that the commander's voices could be heard even from outside and, sitting down, said that he had received a report on the events. Once again, the same fighter, John Kim, was among those who distinguished themselves. The man who entered was the commander of the Hunter Army, General Ko-hak Chol. The battalion commander arrived as quickly as he could. He practically ran to the doors of the building. He ran straight to the company commander. The man was afraid that he was too late. The commander sighed heavily. The battalion commander realized that they had already been there. They were interested in John Kim. He suddenly realized that the timing was not accidental. Everything happened exactly when he was not around, as if someone had deliberately waited for his absence in order to act without interference. An hour earlier, Senior Sergeant Yu Tai-hwan and Sergeant Chang Min-soo, Special Forces hunters, came to see the company commander. They came with a specific purpose and did not intend to delay. The company commander tried to explain that the officers had returned from leave only yesterday, and the battalion commander was not there. However, the guests were persistent. They wanted to see John Kim. Despite the formal obstacles, the men insisted. They just wanted to talk to John Kim. The hunters replied that they could send an official letter right away. They just wanted to talk to the guy. John entered the office. When he entered, the men cast a careful glance at him. John immediately noticed their ranks and realized who he was dealing with. Everything became crystal clear. He found himself in the center of attention of an elite Special Forces unit. The men introduced themselves. They asked if he was the one who jumped into the fake dungeon. John was asked to sit down for a conversation. Special hunter squads operated in special situations and did not obey the usual regulations. Such units needed outstanding fighters. The men emphasized that the headquarters highly appreciated John Kim's active work, and therefore they are ready to offer him a position and a special promotion. The mention of a possible career boost immediately caught John's attention. It was something he couldn't refuse. The men continued to speak, emphasizing that their unit did not accept ordinary soldiers. If John agrees, he will immediately receive the rank of junior sergeant. It was also noted that promotions in Special Forces units occur faster than in regular divisions. All that remained was John's own consent. However, when one of the men received a call and took out the device, John noticed that it was not an ordinary smartphone, but a specialized communication device designed exclusively for Special Forces fighters. He was surprised by the lack of internet access and the ban on using personal devices, even in his free time. For John, this was a serious minus. The restrictions were due to strict security measures. Despite the prospects, he declined the offer, noting that he would not be able to play his favorite game. His decision caused confusion among the Special Forces, who took it as a joke. Having received a refusal, the men were already leaving. The commander was pleased with the outcome of the conversation. The final comments were that John would have failed the entrance test anyway. These words hurt the boy. He asked why they were so sure that he couldn't cope. John suggested checking it out right now. The commander tried to stop him, but in vain. The hunters had already invited John to the training hall. There, Hunter Chang Min-soo had to fight John in a fight according to the rules of the entrance test, 3 rounds of 3 minutes. John said that if he passed the test, the man would apologize to him. He just laughed. He thought that with such a comical weapon as John had chosen, it was impossible to win. The fight began. John confidently dodged attacks. The enemy tried to hit him, but he failed. However, he soon managed to knock John off his feet. The commander watched what was happening with alarm, not understanding where everything was heading. John was lying on the floor. No, he wasn't hurt. He was smiling. Everything was going according to plan. Before the battle, the commander asked John what he was going to do. John declared that he intended to win. The commander knew that anything could be expected from this guy. If anyone could win this fight, it was John Kim. John thought about it. He asked the commander if there would be any problems if he won. The commander replied that he was worried about what would happen if the pride of these people was hurt. Then John decided to let himself be hit once. The round ended and the victory went to the Special Forces fighter. The hunters suggested ending it there, believing that John should be sent to the hospital as soon as possible. However, the commander was not sure of this. Everything that was happening seemed too strange to him. The man said that John was still far from the level of a Special Forces soldier. Meanwhile, John, contrary to expectations, rose to his feet. His resilience surprised even his opponent, who was sure that the guy had lost consciousness. But John did not retreat. He suggested continuing the fight. The stubbornness with which he held himself seemed reckless. But there was an inner strength in him. This time, John activated his new skill, the demonic energy singularity, which allows him to hide traces of magic. His opponent took this as insolence and rushed into the attack with fury. However, John waited for the right moment with cold blood and at the right moment intercepted the attacker's weapon with his whip, leaving him defenseless. Everyone, including the commander, watched what was happening in amazement. John struck his opponent with a whip. At first, it seemed that it did no harm, but the next blow was much stronger, and the man fell to his knees. The fighter's comrades could not understand how such a seemingly light blow turned out to be so devastating. But John knew that the demonic whip had a penetrating power that even the most resilient warriors could not resist. He continued the attack, and each new blow only increased his opponent's suffering. The pain became unbearable, but John did not stop fighting. He enjoyed the moment, watching his opponent's arrogance evaporate with each new blow. When the whip stopped just a few centimeters from the hunter's body, he breathed a sigh of relief. The man's condition was critical. His partner rushed to his aid. The hunter had difficulty staying on his feet, leaning on his partner's shoulder. The man began to suspect that something was wrong with John Kim. His comrade had been steadfastly enduring the blows of the orc herd, but had suddenly passed out from the pain. Watching this, it became clear that it was not just the whip. Ordinary weapons could not cause such damage. The man realized that John Kim was an exception. This guy could not be missed. He offered to apologize for his partner, but John, after thinking for a moment, refused. He admitted that he had put too much demonic energy into the blow and perhaps behaved inappropriately. He apologized in a restrained manner. The surprised man handed him a business card, offering to contact him if he changed his mind. After a short conversation with the commander, they politely declined the offer to enter the hospital, citing their own tactlessness, and left the building. The commander later told this story to his superiors, who received it with humor and approval. Having learned that John had rejected the Special Forces offer, the chief was even pleased. This raised the prestige of their own unit. However, he understood that the Special Forces would not give up so easily. It was decided to create conditions for John to remain in the 104th Division. The boss already knew how to interest the guy. with an offer of career advancement up to division commander. The captain, hearing about what happened, only laughed. He demanded that all necessary documents be prepared. When everything was ready, he gave the order to bring the papers immediately. Sergeant Tom Roth unexpectedly announced that, effective today, Sergeant John Kim would be the commander of their 2nd Squad, 2nd Platoon. Tom added that he himself had the necessary grades for promotion, but voluntarily gave up his place to John. There were no objections among the soldiers. Later in a conversation, Sun Jin asked if it was John who cleared the fake dungeon alone. The guys have already discussed this in the hunting community. John admitted it was him. He just happened to be nearby and had no choice. The comrades didn't quite believe it, but they treated it with respect. Burns asked if there were any other awards. Several days passed. In the goblin dungeon, their squad encountered a threat. A huge goblin with a club appeared. When the situation became critical, a whip suddenly appeared and hit the monster in the eyes. It was John Kim, fighting with his unique whip. John continued to strike, masterfully wielding the weapon. He destroyed enemy after enemy. The boys were amazed. They did not understand why John chose the whip. The issuance of individual weapons is a great rarity, and for John's sake, the division commander had to personally approve about 10 documents. The weapon was distinguished by its balance, grip, and power. John suspected that the secret was in the magical stone embedded in the hilt. But even without that, its power was still impressive. With such an arsenal, he knew that new awards would not be long in coming. Saturday, John sat in the restaurant and looked at the food with a sullen look. Abby, sitting opposite him, asked her interlocutor if they could begin already. John noted with slight irritation why ask him at all. He wondered why Abby was having dinner with him. When the food was ready, Abby was the first to start eating. She began to eat with gusto, commenting admiringly on the taste of the dishes and noting that the restaurant was really good. John, meanwhile, continued to watch her. Abby asked why he wasn't eating, offering to pay for his portion. John explained that it wasn't about the money. He was interested in how she knew he would be in the barracks and would go to that particular area to get food. He became suspicious. He remembered Burns and realized that he had most likely let it slip. Abby denied it, claiming it was just a coincidence. She asked not to scold Burns. John promised to figure everything out himself. Then, clearly confused, he asked the girl if she liked him. This question surprised everyone who was nearby, including the staff. Abby reacted sharply, saying that this was nonsense and that nothing could happen between them. John pointed out that they were the same age, to which Abby agreed, but still stood her ground. She didn't like him. When asked why she was there, Abby replied that she had come on business. She was interested in the closed dungeons in the training center. She mentioned the incident with the red boar and forcing the dungeon. She said she felt like wherever John went, something strange always happened. She wondered if something would happen this time. There was a pause. They sat in silence, looking at each other. John laughed, declaring that he was not a natural disaster at all. Abby looked at him suspiciously. John wondered if she had guessed something. The conversation continued. John asked if Abby had gotten a promotion. The girl said that she took the test last week. John replied that he was confident of her success. Abby, noticing his smile, became angry. She did not like his tone. Her gaze turned angry, but John already sensed demonic energy nearby. He saw where she was focused and sighed heavily. Why now? Especially considering that Abby was literally watching his every move. He imagined himself rushing with the shadow towards the gates that were about to open. Citing the need to go to the toilet, he left the restaurant. Once outside, he immediately noticed a shadow. After praising her for her work, he threw her some food. John felt the demonic energy becoming more and more noticeable. He wondered what Yunsu was doing now. There had been no news from him since he had disappeared. There was a sense of silence all around. Fortunately, it was winter and there were almost no people on the streets. The dungeon began to open. John did not understand why the gate was activated again in a residential area, but he had no choice. He prepared for battle, for the safety of the residents and perhaps for another promotion. The silhouette of a huge creature began to emerge from the gate. An emergency alert came on John's phone. He didn't know how many monsters there would be, but he hoped to deal with them alone. He understood that the military already knew, but it would take them time to get there. In the meantime, he was alone. The first thing to emerge from the gate was a blade glittering in the moonlight. Then the whole creature appeared, huge, ferocious, inspiring terror with its very appearance. John immediately recognized who he was dealing with. It was a hunker. The monster swung, but John managed to dodge. He noticed that the hunker had come alone and wondered how much demonic energy he had managed to absorb. The monster's hands were sharp, deadly blades, as if created solely for killing. John activated the dark arrows, deciding not to let the enemy get too close. Suddenly, the hunker made an unexpected maneuver. His weapon plunged forcefully into the ground next to John. He was amazed. Where could such a monster learn such techniques? The monster rushed forward, but John managed to grab the chain. He dodged the blow again as the hunker swung his blades in all directions, showering the area around him with chaotic attacks. John's counterattack managed to knock the monster off its feet, but he was not going to give up. He was already preparing for the next attack. John stood at the ready when suddenly he heard a familiar voice. Abby Bell was hurrying towards him. Hunker was distracted by the girl and threw one of his blades in her direction. John reacted instantly. He intercepted the chain, disrupting the trajectory of the blow and thereby protecting Abby. She yelled at him, scolding him for showing up unarmed and running away from dinner. John asked in surprise how she knew what was going on. Abby, throwing a road sign at the monster, explained that she had received an emergency message. John followed the sign's flight, caught it in midair, and threw it with force at the hunker. At the same time, he felt his skills strengthen. With a slight grin, he also asked Abby if she had paid for dinner. The blow was crushing. The monster collapsed, and John quietly absorbed the demonic energy of the fallen enemy. Abby didn't see it. When the fog cleared, she recognized him with horror as a hunker, a monster of the highest danger category. She couldn't believe that John had defeated such a monster with one blow. He waved it off modestly, noting that he had managed thanks to her. He noted to himself, if it weren't for her intervention, he would have had time to try out a few more techniques. Abby frowned, noting that it was odd to see a hunk out alone. She promised to return to this conversation later. At that moment, a new shadow appeared from the gate. Next comes another hunker, and then another. Abby said with concern in her voice that they needed to wait for reinforcements. John nodded and told her to leave the battlefield immediately. The girl tried to stop him, calling him crazy, but he had already activated his skills and rushed forward with joyful determination. Every new encounter is a chance to improve. 2 moons shone high in the sky. At this time, a figure in a black cloak made its way through the forest. Having reached the ancient stones, she stopped. The entrance to the dungeon opened before her. Descending the long, dark corridor, the figure approached the magic circle. Standing before the image on the wall, the man bowed in prayer. Then the hood was thrown back. It turned out to be a girl. She stood in front of the cult symbol, Little Sister Rumi, and quietly said, "Mr. Minold,